anyone's interested in having a debate like this, remember to check out Arthuria. Links in the description. So yeah, this is where the debate's going on. So if you'll hear Stone, he'll be the moderator, and obviously Vegan Footsoldier, who thank you very much, Vegan Footsoldier, for the debate. So that's just like the introduction to the debate. So what's the props again, man? Like, where we're going with this?
Well, yeah, nice one. So I saw on your YouTube stream you've put that I think the original proposition ages ago was Marxism is a disease, and I, in the meantime, forgot that, and I thought we were debating socialism is a disease. But I don't mind. We can debate Marxism or socialism. We can debate all of it. I'm up for.
So you would go so far to call socialism a disease? I thought like Marxism is a lot easier to attack because it's like kind of
it would be, but I'm up for everything because, of course, anyone tuning in right now knows that this. Although I am going to seriously debate this and put up good arguments for this, it is a tiny bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing, right? It is a bit of an experimental proposition. So yeah, it is a bit of fun on one hand, but on the other hand, I do think that I'm going to put forward some good arguments and potentially change your mind on a few things.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Hopefully, I'll do the same, and maybe we'll get some nice like middle ground or something. So so if you want to start, like, why either like Marxism or socialism is a disease, you can pick your choice, your prop. You can pick whether you want to go Marxism or socialism, and I'll go from that point on.
We can go with Marxism then, because I think that's nice, because essentially we've got two props on the table. Then we've got Marxism is a disease, and we've got socialism isn't vegan. But before we get into it, what I generally see online when people have these types of debates, they'll say socialism this, left wing that, and communism this, and Marxism that, and no one actually has their terminologies nailed down. So 1 minute they're talking about communism, but the other person who their interlocutor thinks that they're talking about Denmark, for example. Like no one has a clear understanding of what they're talking about. So I thought, especially with this debate, with all debates, but especially with this debate, we should probably clarify some definitions before we actually start off.
That sounds like a really good point. Do you want me to try and clarify what I take these, like some principal words to be, and then?
Well, how about, because I've written some things down. How about I read my definitions and you can tell me if you agree or where you don't agree with.
Yeah, that sounds fair.
Okay, so I'm just trying to do really simple ones here. So like one sentence one. So capitalism, I would define as a system of private property rights and free markets, and the logical result of that would be a minarchist type of state. Right? I'm not arguing for anarcho-capitalism here. I'm arguing for like a classic capitalism, which is a.
I think that's a bit of an extensive definition of capitalism, if I'm honest. I don't think that you need to say, like, I don't think capitalism implies minarchy. And precisely, I'll actually get into this later on in the discussion, actually revolving China. Involving China rather. And then I would go so far as to say that I think capitalism is, like the system from which, the system. What did you define it as in terms of private property? The system of.
Yeah, system of private property rights and free markets.
I mean, private property rights can exist in other systems. So a system of private property rights and free markets. I don't know, demarcated by the, or like, in which the means of production are owned by a private class of individuals or are privately owned.
You can add like a classical capitalism means of production bit to it. I don't disagree with that. But when you say that, when you talk about property rights and like other systems like we could have property rights in a communist system and stuff like this. I'm going to start disagreeing, and that's something that we're going to debate today. So
yeah, that's fair enough.
Right.
That's fair enough. So that maybe that's the point of contention where I'd say, like, for example, market socialism, property rights exist in that. And I take that to be a form of socialism and not capitalism. Although it has aspects of, the prior system within it.
Well, I would say on one of my other definitions, I would disagree with that one of my other definitions. So let's just like broadly agree, like capitalism, when we say capitalism, we're talking about private property rights and free markets in a real general roundabout way. I think we agree on that in a roundabout way, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, so long as we say like, like privately owned means of production, and the end of the markets is like free markets, yeah, or like or like not necessarily even actually. I think I'd probably push back on the free markets and say that and go and actually, yeah, I'd probably push back on free markets. I'd just say like privately owned means of production, and the principal driving force is profit.
Well, let's agree on that. There's a few differences in opinions on what capitalism seems to be, but I think it's close enough for us to move on to define socialism. And I define socialism personally.
Can I just say, I think that, I know this is going to sound stupid, but I really think that the dictionary definition of capitalism really is probably really an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than the state.
Wait, you want to go with that one, Ben?
Yeah, I think that actually just sums it up really well. I think.
Yeah, let's go with that definition. But the reason why I wanted to define it in terms of private property rights and free markets is because that's the actual functional bedrock of capitalism. And the other definition seems to be, to me, I think it's confusing to people who don't understand the implications of those words. But okay, let's move on to a socialism definition. So I see socialism as a system of ostensibly collective ownership where the state distributes resources artificially, which is a statist ideology, right? So you've got a state artificially distributing scarce resources amongst the numerous ends, personal ends, right? So whereas in the capitalist economy, you've got many ends and scarce resources, and free markets distribute these resources. Under socialism, we have a state artificially distributing the resources.
No, I'm going to push back on there as well. So, like the dictionary definition, I would modify here. So the dictionary definition is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned and regulated by the community as a whole. I would say that it should be owned and regulated by the workers. So workers own the means of production, and that would be how I would classify socialism. As socialism is a political system, a political and economic system in which the workers own the means of production.
Right. So the difficulty I see here is when we have a system where we have a whole group of people owning something, owning the rights, or owning the decision making process. We have to have centralization. If it's all owned by one group, then there has to be a mouthpiece for that group, and that's normally the state. Because what you could be describing under your definition could just be anarcho-capitalism.
Oh no, I would say that there's like worker cooperatives. So like, and it wouldn't be anarcho-capitalism because capitalism, and like, so you could have employees within capitalism. You couldn't have employees within socialism. Like the point of ownership lies in the hands of the workers. So if you're a worker, you're an owner. That's the idea of like, workers own the means of production, rather than, in a capitalist state, being a worker is separated from ownership, which is, the idea of Marxist alienation in the first place. So no, I don't think I could be describing anarcho-capitalism.
I find that definition absurd though, because how would it be possible for there to be a system where you didn't have employees, but the workers own the means of production? Because that means if you have a very complicated product or service that you have to offer, then how is it possible for one person to own the means of production? That would mean that you would own the intellectual property, which is the means of production, for example, for creating an extremely complicated design such as a rocket. Let's say a rocket. No one person can own the means of production. So if it was collectively owned, like you own that bit, I own that bit, and she owns that bit, then we have to assemble that in some structure. And then when we agree and enter into contracts with each other and work together, and you do this bit, I do that bit, and she does that bit, then we come together in a free market of exchange. So that's capitalism. So what you're describing is either capitalism or cannot work, because if it is this idea where everyone owns the means of production in entirety, it's just not possible unless you're literally like making wooden bowls or something extremely primitive. The second you have a complex operation, it's impossible to for every worker to own the entire means of production. And if you don't own the entire means of production, then you have to enter into a free market, or you have to have some state
No, I mean, no one's like you could have cooperatives. So like, and like, so for example, let's say in a given example, let's say let's take, actually I just bought a new pair of shoes actually from the vegetarian shoe company. This is not an ad, by the way.
Okay.
Who are a worker cooperative, from what I'm aware, in Manchester. So they basically make Doc Martens style-esque shoes with higher quality materials, and they're a worker cooperative, in England. So more ethical, even cheaper than Doc's, higher quality materials, all great for me. So I went and bought them. In that scenario, I don't think that let's say the blueprint of the shoe is owned by any particular member, where they're like, all right, I designed the shoe, the shoe's blueprint is mine. It's rather that the company owns everything and everyone owns a part of the company. It's like the company acts as an individual, the same way the corporation acts as an individual, similar to a way that corporations act today. Corporations own the assets, and then somebody owns parts of that corporation, like the shareholders. But the corporation itself is its own entity. It would be a very similar concept in terms of a worker cooperative. The cooperative itself owns the patent in this case, and then that patent is then, and then that cooperative is then owned by the workers.
Did the workers freely enter into an agreement to work there?
I have no idea.
Were they forced? Did
Well, I don't believe that anyone's saying like, you will make shoes or I'm going to shoot you. So no, right. I think it was free engagement. Yeah.
And did they have a choice to work somewhere else?
Maybe, probably.
Yeah, like no one said, either you work here, I'm going to shoot you. You can't go and work at McDonald's or WH Smith's, because if you do, I'm going to shoot you. Right? No one said that. So they freely entered into an agreement, and then they signed contracts to purchase shares in a company, and then they worked there.
Not purchase. This is the slight difference. That I wouldn't be surprised if the way that this is formed as a corporation, it won't be formed as a normal corporation. It'll be formed as like a partnership. And I was talking to Jeremy about this, the economist, and I was saying that the way in which they gain shares in socialism, in a market socialist, in a cooperative, cannot be purchased. It can only be accumulated by a mechanism within the business. So, for example, in relation to the value you produce, or and so like if you're producing most of the value for the corporation, you gain a bigger amount of that. It would be a contract, but you couldn't purchase the shares. That's the separation. You'd be an owner by definition in socialism. You can't not own the product of your labor.
Well, what is the company called? I'll go on Company's House right now and have a look at their.
Check it out. It's vegetarian shoes. terrible name. Actually, need to redo that branding like badly. But the concept behind the corporations, like the company's really nice. But and really good quality shoes. They still use a shank actually, which is nice. Don't use a shank in docks anymore ever since they got like exported to like China and Thailand for production.
Okay, so I'm not sure if this is the right one. It seems to be the right one. So I found Vegetarian Shoes Limited on Company's House. They're registered as a private limited company.
It very well might be. But I'm pretty sure it's like a cooperative, so I don't know how it's run on the inside.
Well, I've got their filing history here. I can tell you.
Tell us.
Yeah, I can tell you here. So they've got their full accounts up. Their business address is in Brighton. I'm not sure if it's the same one. I
think it actually might be Brighton. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can see their full list of shareholders. So they've got shareholders, and because private limited company, of course, you've got shareholders because that's.
But is there anyone that's the majority shareholders or anything? I don't know how that. Like, it's just an example.
Yeah, because you've got Robin Edwin. Robin Edwin Webb is the company director. So you've got a director, and then you've got ordinary shareholders. So you've got 100 shares to. I can't see the name here. It's not disclosing. It's not disclosing the names, but on Company's House you can see that there are 100 allotted shares, and it's a private limited company. You can see everything. You can see the annual return.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that we don't have. I think one of the issues of our system is that we don't have like a separate, like this is a worker cooperative structure. Like as in when you file your taxes.
Yeah.
You can't file a cooperative. I don't think in Britain.
Yeah, so the way in which this company is set up is they are using a traditional private limited company holders, and maybe they want to say that the way that we like to view this company is that when you come and work with us, you own the means of production, you own your labor, you own the surplus value that you create. You can say that, but all that is just a contract and an agreement that instead of being paid by the hour, or instead of getting paid a certain percentage of something, you get a higher percentage of it, right? So if they want to split up,
I completely disagrry. I completely disagree. So, like,
how can you disagree?
So, like in this scenario, maybe I don't know what's going on in this corporation. Like, and I'm just using it as an example. If it was, let's say, like what I would consider an actual worker cooperative, ownership is guaranteed, and I think that should be guaranteed by the state. But like obviously with the way in which what society runs, like cooperatives aren't the mandated kind of principal means of production. So I would say that production should, worker ownership should be guaranteed by the state, and then in this, it's not a private contract. It is a right. You already own your labor. You already own what you produce. You aren't being paid a wage. There is a big distinction between a wage and a normal like fair trade. I would make that distinction. I'd make a very clear divide in that. So when I take a trade, so for example, someone buying, let's say, a pair of shoes from another, I give you money, you give me shoes. We're in a fair we're in a fair contract, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing unsocialist about that. Then, however, if you were to move it like into a let's say a system where it was like capitalist, like you make shoes and I own them and you get paid a wage. Everything you produce is already owned by the company from which you work for, and you're paid a wage which is separate from the market value of the product of your labor, and you don't get to control what happens to the product of your labor. So if you decide, like, look, actually, no, I don't want to sell you this product anymore, so I've put the labor in. No, I don't want this to go to you. Now, there might be issues in which you wouldn't be able to do that if people had put labor in prior to you, or you may have to pay for like the waste of the product from which you've taken from individual. But if you decide, no, actually, I don't, fuck you, you're not getting my labor, that would be applicable to a socialist situation. In a capitalist situation, you'd be like, no, get out, you're sacked. That would be a primary difference. The concept of a
Well,
wage
look, you don't
is a capitalist notion in the first place.
you don't seem to be defining. You seem to have this very, very narrow definition of what capitalism is, and it's false, right? So you're saying that I can't enter. Well, essentially, what you're saying is, if I want to say to you, perspective philosophy, let's create a new YouTube channel, and we're going to split the profits. You're saying that I can't do that under a capitalist society. I can't enter into agreement with someone that I'm going to split profits. Any surplus value that we generate, I can't distribute that evenly in terms of the amount of work you put in, or I can distribute profits however the hell I want. If I want to distribute profits by saying he who works the most gets the most profits, or he who adds the most value, or he who gets the most customers, or he who gets the most profit from the most profitable customers, or he who does whatever, or meets this person, or signs that contract, or does this, gets the most money, or gets the bonus, or gets this. I can say whoever gets, I can distribute money in whatever way I want based on an agreement, right? It's called the free market, because if I have an advert in a newspaper saying that I want someone to come and go into business with me, that's the free market. If I want to put an advert in the newspaper to say I want someone to perform this unskilled labour for £10 an hour, then that's the free market. And if I want to say that I'm going to pay you 90% of all the surplus value of my business because I just want to be a silent business partner, do that as well. That's the free market, and that's what free market capitalism allows us to do.
Defining it as free market capitalism, but that's not what capitalism is. Like, you're pigeonholing capitalism into free market capitalism. Capitalism has nothing to do with necessarily with free market capitalism as a specific definition of capitalism.
Yeah, this is why we need to go back to definitions, because I'm not talking about because you're begging the question when you want to define capitalism. I
find capitalism as privately owned enterprises and private ownership of the means of production, and I don't think there is an issue there. I don't see how I've in any way, for example, the concept of a wage would be illegal in socialism. It could not exist in socialism. You couldn't have a socialist state which has a wage, unless you have something as fucking contradictory, built-in contradiction of the Maoist social communist communist capitalism that exists over there, which is a deliberate living contradiction and horror of the 20th century. But that's not what we would consider socialism, is it? It's the spectre.
Consider capitalism, and that's the thing which brought lots of people out of poverty and accelerated China to be one of the richest nations in the world.
But no, I see it's brought, the funny thing is it's merged, ironically, exactly what you wanted. Free market economy. You said free market, right? Why did you want free market? You didn't want government telling you what to do. You want to be able to, I could pay people whatever I want. Precisely the opposite way round in China. The government has absolute control over the market. It's unbridled control, and it does that.
But it's only since in China they stopped putting their talents into the private sector that the private sector has actually managed to get a foothold and exploded into being the most thriving economy in the world. It's now, I think, that it's overtaken America. I'm pretty sure. It depends on what statistics you look at. It's a bigger economy than America.
I'm pretty sure in terms of growth, it's growing faster. But
that's only after the government got its dirty claws out of the meddling in people's business and let people get on with it.
I completely disagree. First, the original growth, which was when it was a tiger economy in the first place, started with the government intervention, and the government's and still it bans the opposition for the private corporations that would come and meddle with the internal Chinese market. The reality is the government is still heavily involved with the Chinese state, even if it's not actively authoritarianly involved. It's ideologically involved. I mean, take a look at Hong Kong. So, for example, it's almost fascist, right? Look, the government has it's proposed a government of a new government in Hong Kong, which has like 20 corporately elected, rather than democratically elected leadership. It's got corporately elected leadership and government elected leadership. So they're basically saying, like, look, they're in line with the capitalists. It's a living contradiction, right? Like, now that's not to say that it's not communist. It still has the violence, the monopoly of violence exists in the hands of a communist government, of a vanguard party. You know what I mean? It just so happens to thrive alongside the capitalist disgust and greed. Like, they have the revolutionary destructive force of the communists, with unbridled greed and corruption. Like, it's honestly the worst state I could imagine. It's literally like the horror of the industrial corpse making mechanism. Right now, the reality of the situation is that the way in which that market functions is in 100%. I would argue is 100% determined not simply by the unrestricted free market capitalism, where corporations sabotage each other and Chinese power may be brought down by government intervention. No. The government intervenes in order to force corporations into the most outwardly competitive market, in which it's the Chinese market versus the international, the American market. They're in a constant trade war with the West, and the following that Chinese ideology. Like, if anything, it's the government intervention, the deliberate, it's the ideological inconsideration of, let's say, pollution. It's the inconsideration of unwillingness to ban what Western the imperialist-esque powers would have banned from either the morality that we have. China won't ban that shit, and it'll allow it to continue. Whilst it will ban, it will ban the opposition to those corporations. Like, the reality is that China, I would definitely argue, is just an amalgamation of a totalitarian communist government and a capitalist free market, quote unquote.
Well, there was a few slanderous things in there, and I don't need to spend the debate defending China. I don't think that everything China does is of the highest moral integrity or value.
Well, I think when they're trying to make, when they try to blend a monkey and a pig together, in terms of genetic engineering, from what I've heard, like, I'm pretty sure I saw that. That was pretty bad. Like, the still test on animals, even when it's not necessary. The levels of pollution that they're willing to put out in the atmosphere. Or, we facilitate it. I mean, I hate our government as well, like, if that's any consideration. But, like...
Yeah, we don't need to just, like, have a hate China stream. Let's get back to our original, what we were talking about originally. And you started saying about the cooperative formations, and I was arguing that what you were describing seemed to be simply an alternative structure available under free market capitalism. But what I would ask you is, the people who own the means of production, who come and work at factories, should they also own the risk?
Yeah.
So you've got a 16-year-old kid who's just got out of school, and he goes and works at this, and he manages to earn, let's say, 20 quid an hour, and he thinks, wow, that's actually really good. Like, my dad earns 20 quid an hour, for example. I'm doing really well. And then 1 month later, the company goes bankrupt, and he, because he shares in the company, he gets let's say £150,000 debt that needs to be paid for, and that's his responsibility now. So would you see that as a good thing?
Well, I talked to Jeremy about this, and I'd say that ultimately, like, I do think that workers should own the risk as much as the reward. Being an owner has its drawbacks, and that's just the reality of things. But I would also say that when we look at how corporations are formed, the corporation like is usually responsible for the debt. And when we look at the share, who ends up responsible, for the amount of for the how much the how much of the corporate debt is like their responsibility. You look to the shareholders, right? And they only have like so much responsibility, for that debt. And the way that
No, you don't just look at the shareholders to see who takes the risk, because at the end of the day, shareholders, their shares, the price of their share can go to zero. There's no negative risk associated with that. It's only you can lose your shares. You can lose the money of your shares, all depending on the actual structure set up. But generally speaking, when a share price goes to zero, you don't, unless it's a futures market, but we're not talking about futures, we're talking about shares.
Yeah.
But yeah, when share price goes to zero, you've lost your money and you move on with your life. But when you're actually the director of a company and you've put your house up as collateral on loans to grow your business, and then the business
but
it goes into receivership.
So that what you have is like for example, who the direct. So for example, in terms of the director of the company, it's chosen by the shareholders, right? Like the board of like the board of directors who is chosen by the shareholders. From what I'm
what do you mean? I can create a company before we even have shareholders. I can create a company. You can be a sole trader. You could be a limited liability partnership. You could be a limited liability.
I'm just talking about
company.
I'm just talking about like a limited corporation.
Yeah. So in Germany, GmbH, in America, LLC, in the UK, a private limited company.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're the director of that company, it depends what structural arrangements you have in terms of growing your company, because at the end of the day, you've stepped up to the plate to take on the risk and be the entrepreneur to provide value and reap the reward if you're successful. So what you've done is you've probably entered that situation and been like, okay, well, I don't have any money. I'm going to put all my savings into it. I've put £50,000 of my savings into this shoe company, but the machines are expensive. The machines cost 200,000 because that's just how much the machines cost, and I need to lease the premises and stuff. So then I need to go to the bank, and the bank's not going to give me a loan because like the bank doesn't see any figures yet. They don't have any collateral, so I'm going to put my house up as collateral. And so what you do, you put your house up as collateral. So now you've got this person who's got all the skills, all the know-how, the get up and go to actually go out there and start a company, the shoemaking company, take on this enormous risk, put all of his life savings into it, go to the bank and put his house as collateral, and risk being evicted and chucked onto the street, being tossed out of his own home. And then you've got this unskilled labor spotty kid comes along and says, no, I want to earn all of my labor. You can't give me a wage because I'm a socialist. Who's got more responsibility there? The guy who's going to lose his house, or the spotty kid who just wants 20 quid an hour?
Well, I think like that's an oversimplification of what.
It's not. That's how companies work. I own companies.
No,
and that's how it works.
Yeah, that's really lovely, and that's an oversimplification of socialism and the worker cooperative, though. Maybe how companies work, and I'm not disagreeing. I don't think I disagree with anything you said about directors. And like responsibility in terms of, let's say, like credit, but that doesn't mean that, like, for example, like in a worker cooperative, if you establish, let's say, a corporation, a worker cooperative, and you establish it and you go like, look, I've had to invest, let's say, 200,000 into this. I need that paid back in order to ensure that I am relatively safe in my well-being, and to respect my labor, because my labor is represented in the capital from which I've invested. And so they go, okay, so you've got a contract with the corporation to pay you, a private individual, a certain amount more than the other individuals within the corporation, simply because you've put up what is a loan to or like a startup loan to the to the cooperative. That doesn't mean that you get ownership of the individual's labor who comes to work for you. So like they come and work in the company, you're not entitled to what they produce in the world. You, like, in and of itself, you don't get to decide how much it's worth. You don't get to decide how much value like they should get paid. That's determined by the market. That's determined by mechanisms within the cooperative from which we are willing to engage in a free in something that represents a free trade, a fair trade, not a labor market. So yeah, I think that was a real oversimplification, like primarily because let's say even in terms of ownership, the value produced by an individual represents how much value the overall corporation, or the cooperative rather, excuse me, has been able to be produced. And so you can have the share accumulation, more or less be be controlled by the like terms of ownership, be controlled more by the individual who's put more value in. Like the more value they've produced, the more value they're entitled to in terms of the corporation. And then also you can still have a democratic system in which the individual may have those shares, but they might have equal democratic control of the corporation in terms of the share value doesn't determine how many votes you get and stuff like that. So I don't know, it's definitely an oversimplification, man. Like, come on, it's not like some 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid or something walks up to a business, starts working there, and then becomes CEO overnight. It's not
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, you've got a situation where you've got this entrepreneur who has learned everything there is to know about making shoes, has gone out there, bought all the machines, has put his house up as collateral, all of his life savings into this, has worked 18, 20-hour days for a year to get it up and running. And then he puts an ad in the newspaper. People needed to run to work at my shoe factory. And then so he gets his first employee who comes along, who's his 16-year-old, who he has to press a button and put the shoe in a mold, press another button.
And without him pressing those buttons, those shoes would not exist.
No, it's not true, because the CEO, the person who started the company, could press the button. But he's been pressing the button. He's been making the shoes. He's been pressing the button. But then he's like, okay, well, I need to
get
someone else to press this button to make the shoes, because obviously I've got better things to do. My skill set is such that I'm running the whole bloody company, whereas I just need someone to press this little button, and that is completely unskilled labor. You don't need any skills whatsoever.
I think this idea of unskilled labor being less valuable is in and of itself just insulting. Not the case.
Completely,
because the unskilled labor might be it might be easier to do, but the value would not be produced without it. Even if the CEO is the one pressing the button, the button's getting pressed by someone. And look, you can have unskilled labor that is manually intensive. You can have unskilled labor that means you're carrying bricks, 10-hour days. And it might be far more labor hours going into it, but it might be less training needed for the job. And let's be honest, if I'm entirely honest with you, I think that the managerial class are perhaps only skilled in two things: the glorified administrators who are capable of organizing humans into something that could be done collectively, that could be replaced with AI. And I also think that the managerial class are rhetoricians used to self-justify their position and make out like they're actually necessary for the production of value, when in reality, I don't think they do very much.
That's just ridiculous, man. That's just
ridiculous as saying the cashier in McDonald's is worth next to nothing, even though they are doing all of the work necessary, or a lot of the work necessary, to actually commit the act of trade from which the corporation stands. That without all of those, individual employees, the corporation would be worthless. The CEO
you've got this weird assumption. You've got this weird assumption here that the more effort someone puts in, or something like this, the more that they should earn, or the more value they bring.
I think the value
is not tied to effort or work or anything.
I never said it was.
Yeah, so if you've got someone at McDonald's operating
then it's also
checkout,
not tied. It's also not tied to skill, and it's not tied to expertise. Then, so
of course it's not. Of course it's not. This is what I'm saying.
So why should the CEO get paid more?
Because of scarcity. It's not saying I'm more skilled, therefore I need more money. That's not what is said under capitalism at all. That's a complete misunderstanding of what free markets actually mean, right? So if you've got an incredibly high level of skill, you're scarce, and scarcity bids up the price because it's just basic supply and demand, basic economics. If something's more scarce, right, and it's demanded, it requires a higher bid to get that than something which is just abundant. For example, if I'm going to say, look, it's like, oh, I've got here like a ton of soil, so I can dig up some soil in my garden, and I can give you this soil, or I can give you some gold instead. Well, the soil you can get anywhere. You can go around the back of your house.
I understand scarcity. I really understand scarcity, Footsoldier. I understand supply and demand, and I understand scarcity. The whole point of what I'm saying, though, and if you understood any of the socialist, positions in the first place, is that labor isn't in a market, so the scarcity of it's not the scarcity of the CEO, it's of his labor. And what I'm asking is what allows that CEO, and their labor to be worth more in the first place. So from which the value that they produce can only be done by them. So it's like, yeah, like take for example,
no, it can't only be done by them. If there was someone who could do that, dude, if there was someone who could do that job better than the managers or whoever you're seeing as this sort of like cigar smoking executive, if someone can come along and say, look, I'll do a better job for half the price, and I can demonstrate that somehow, that person's getting the sack and the new person's getting hired. Right? They don't. Corporations don't just pay cigar smoking Illuminati lizards to earn loads of money. That's not how.
Like, to be entirely honest with you, corporations basically pick the CEO's work in order to do a few things, and it's usually more to do with avoiding tax, and exploiting labor force as much as humanly possible. It's cost cutting in every way, shape, or form in order for them to get essentially bonuses. In relation from the board of directors. So, like, yeah, that's essentially the profit motive.
You've got this cigar smoking Illuminati CEO boardroom American Wall Street mentality going on.
No, I don't.
Think of your ordinary business.
What are you talking about?
Think of an ordinary business.
Okay, let's think of an ordinary business like Amazon.
No,
right?
Let's think of a local business. Let's
no,
around the corner from you.
No, like you think of the look, let's be honest. This is the typical like capitalist kind of bullshit. The problem that your local mom and dad, local business where it's like this small end like little business where they've got like a cafe or something, and they go, oh, but look, like the if you put these like restrictions on corporations, like this small business will be harmed and affected, and undoubtedly it will.
These are also corporations, and they make up the majority of corporations.
Yeah, but not in terms of numbers, like in terms of like median, not in terms of like actual ownership, in terms of wealth. Like that's like by far. What do you mean? That is the majority of the economy. You don't judge like ownership in terms of how many owners they are. You're judging in terms of who owns the majority of the actual means of production.
But what metric are you trying to judge here? I'm not judging anything right now. We're just having a conversation about hiring people.
I'm trying to judge like in terms of ownership. You said like the average business. I'm saying the average business is the majority, is the businesses which take up the majority of the economy, and not like
the majority of the economy is small businesses.
No, it's not. The majority of the economy is owned by much larger private enterprise. Not in terms of wealth, in terms of the genuine like proportion of the economy. In terms of owners, in terms of how many corporations there are more small businesses. In terms of like how much is owned, and like in terms of like actual proportion of the economy, if you look at it, it's big business.
It just depends on how you're looking at the numbers. If you're like,
well, it depends on the macroeconomics as well. Right? Like so if we go like macroeconomics.
I don't recognize the distinction between macro and microeconomics.
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, like in the grand scheme of things, if we're looking at a single industry or something like, or a single market, then like, yeah, it depends on that market. But if we look at like enterprise as a whole within global capitalism, the majority of wealth and production, like the means of production, is owned by a certain class of individuals. Like that is unbelievably clear, to the point in which like private ownership now has wealth to, like wealth accumulation to like 80 people own the same wealth as like 3.5 billion. I really do not say like I think two men. I think it's like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos now own the same wealth as like half of the United States. So in terms of like private ownership in the economy, the average business isn't something like like me local vape shop or like like me local like convenience store. Like it's like Walmart. Like
Yeah, but what I'm trying to do is get back to basics, because what you keep doing is conjuring images of cigar smoking executives in a boardroom around a long table on Wall Street, and that's detached from it's too high level. You can't. We're trying to run before we walk. We need to understand small businesses before we can understand multinational corporations, because you just keep saying that the managers and executives and directors and stuff, they just sit around and like scoop off all this excess value for not doing stuff.
No, that's what I said.
And they can be like replaced with the AI. You even said.
I said like in terms of organization of labor, I think that you probably could like, and I don't think that's even that like contentious. Literally, I think that like if you look at like how businesses are actually formulated around like actual production and the production of like and the allocation of labor, that's not actually overly complex. And I think that that's not how managers even try to justify themselves. Managers typically try to justify themselves to boards of directors of like how much money they're going to be able to save by increasing like by either reducing taxes or extracting the most out of the labor being done.
Yeah, so, of course you want to extract the most. You want to exploit to the maximum extent possible. Exploitation in an economic sense. If you don't exploit to the maximum extent, you should be fired as a manager, and a new one should be hired who's better and can exploit the resources to the maximum extent.
But because when you see labor as a resource, you're exploiting individuals. You're not exploiting, let's say, like how much like gold there is in the ground. Like that there is an equivocation rather of the word exploitation, which is unjustified. You're already objectifying.
There's two senses. I'm not equivocating. There's two senses.
No, I'm saying that there's the objective. Maybe perhaps you're not, but I'm saying that capitalism does, and that it objectifies an individual and turns them into a resource. An individual goes to work, and they become a cog in a machine.
Everyone is just part of the free market. If you don't like the job, find another one. If you don't like the employee, find another employee. It's all free markets.
Free for who? Like not free for those individuals who are toiling away just to make ends meet when they would have otherwise been able to feed themselves if they weren't coerced into a relationship from which, if they don't enrich a certain class of individuals, they face like you talked about the individual losing their home and having to take facing real life consequences. I don't think anyone should be facing like the consequences of being homeless or
so you want all of the upside with none of the downside risk.
No,
but you're just not an entrepreneur. That's fine. You don't have to be an entrepreneur.
I'm just not unethical. I don't think that an individual should have to I don't think that markets should be allowed to exist in certain circumstances. Healthcare shouldn't be a market.
Why not? Like because
one, it's inefficient.
We had the coronavirus vaccine as quick as we did.
Well, no, actually, it was massive government funding there, and
it was huge. It was huge incentivization from the free markets. That's why we had the AstraZeneca. We had the Moderna vaccine.
Billions of taxpayer money pumped into literally, was it like 7 companies in the UK?
There's been money spent galore. There's been inflation galore, but that's
there is no reason to think that it could not have been done in terms of a centralized in a governmental structure. That's not true, and it's not like the scientists who are doing this are going to get like massive payouts. That's not how it works. Even the people doing the labor aren't the ones facing the incentivization. The ones that are being incentivized again are the CEOs. And the high and the board members. It's not the incentivization in a private economy is for those individuals who benefit from private ownership, not from those who are employed. You can give them throw them a bonus here or there and incentivize it like that, but in reality that would be given through market socialism anyway. So, this level of
Dude,
incentivization can exist anyway.
dude, you just claim that that the public sector would just be as competent as the private sector in developing medicines, but we've seen time and time again that it's
No,
just
I
it's
said
basic economics.
in terms of medicine.
Stop interrupting, man. Basic
We
economics.
interrupted
When the
before.
private sector does something, it's competition and efficiency which produces results. When the public sector gets involved, it's lack of competition and a surplus, infinite money with no incentive to be efficient, which makes it more expensive and of a lower quality. We've seen it time and time again. Anytime the public sector tries to outcompete the private sector, we get poorer results or more expensive results, or it takes longer. When you give it the money to, when you leave the private sector alone, it does its thing in the most efficient way possible. Otherwise, it will go out of business. That's what free markets are.
That's unbelievably wrong. Actually, it does its thing in the most profitable way possible. And so, if the goal is efficiently providing medicine, in the private sector. So, like it does its way, and it does it in the most profitable way possible, not the most efficient way possible. The most efficient way possible, it proposes an ideological end which is separate to profit.
So,
for example, providing high quality medicine. I mean, here's the thing. Give me an example.
No, there's several points, dude. Let's do one at a time. Let's do one at a time. So you said it does it in the most profitable way possible and not in the most efficient way. Well, if it was very inefficient, would it be profitable?
It can be, yeah, absolutely.
No, well, that's just not how economics works, dude.
Yes, it does. Like, look at it like this. We destroy massive amounts of food all the time. If our goal was feeding the population, capitalism wouldn't be the mechanism from which we do it, because we actively try to destroy as many products as possible at the end of a day that haven't sold. Let's say let's take Lidl, right? Lidl has a bakery. At the end of the day, it used to sell off its products, for pennies, because it used to think, I'll recuperate some profit there. Found out that people would wait to the end of the day to get those 10 pence bread buns, man. And so it was actually in its interest to throw them in the bin. So it started throwing them all away. People had to pay full price. They made more money. When you talk about feeding the population, for example, capitalism doesn't do it in the most efficient way possible. It does it in the most profitable way possible. Capitalism works on profit, not, let's say, ideological efficiency. Like ideological efficiency, you can give over to something more akin to a government where they might be bureaucratic and inefficient because of the mechanisms and methodologies they employ, which is I would completely agree with. But in terms of like the overall goal, a government would provide healthcare, for example, to everyone in the most efficient way possible, because its goal is to ensure everyone gets healthcare. A private system is to ensure it makes as much money off of everyone, even if it isolates people from that healthcare, which is what we see in the United States.
Dude, saying that the public sector does something in the most efficient way possible, more so than the private sector, is just delusional, factually incorrect nonsense, dude. Right? Look, your example with Greg's chucking away the fruit. Let's say that Greg's decided, we want to be less efficient producing food, so we're going to start chucking away the food before we sell it. Would they be more profitable or less profitable?
I never said before they sell it. I said before, like, so they could sell it. Wait, so sorry, say that again. Like throwing it away before they sell it.
Yeah, would that be more profitable or less profitable?
But it'll be less profitable, yes.
Right, because their efficiency has been reduced because they have wastage in their system. So anytime that there is a lack of efficiency in the private sector, it costs profits. And if you're incentivized by profits,
no, it's not. I'll just give you the example of an inefficient system in terms of something that would be inefficient by profitable standards, but then more efficient in terms of, let's say public well-being. People getting 10 pence bread, right? Like, like people actually being able to, food is more easily accessible to individuals.
What Greg's do is up to them. But that's not universal in terms of capitalism. That's not universal.
No, it is. No, that is universal. I mean, like artificially created scarcity is 100%.
That's what the public sector does. That's what governments do. Artificial allocation of resources. That's what interventionism is.
No, I mean capitalists do that do it themselves. I just give you the example of little. And what you're talking about is like, what regulatory capture by the capitalist class. A lot of the time, we create our own regulations in order to bolster capitalism, which is why I give you the example of communist China basically being the arm of the corporations. It's like one of the most filthy, horrible capitalist countries in the world.
Well, you can use derogatory language as much as you want towards China, but we're not talking about China.
It's not
We're
China.
talking
I'm not saying China's like bad in terms of like the Chinese people. I mean, capitalism is bad. Like, I'm not saying that, and the way that China is governed, I would say is unbelievably unethical.
You've said a lot that capitalism is bad, but let's not just like do well poisoning of capitalism. Let's actually give arguments here.
Okay.
I'm trying to give arguments. And I'm trying to refute what you're saying, because you keep saying stuff like capitalism isn't the most efficient thing. So I'm refuting that. Capitalism.
You haven't provided an argument for why capitalism is more efficient. And in terms of efficiency, I've provided an argument which calls into question of what it's efficient in doing. I'm saying capitalism only efficiently produces profit, and I cannot disagree with that. Capitalism is by and large the most efficient economic ideology in producing profit. It will produce more profit than any other system that has ever been conceived of, because all it wants to do is produce profit regardless of the end, which is why China is the most capital. It is the peak of capitalism, because it's profit without any restrictions in terms of ethics. And
so when we start removing government intervention, we can make it even more efficient in a way that the public sector could not possibly compete in terms of efficiency. Let's take, for example, building a hospital. Or let's even take, for example, the example that Joe Biden just said the other day. It was, I think, 2 days ago. He said, okay, we're going to build infrastructure, we're going to build bridges, and everything's going to be made in the United States, and we're going to get all these jobs to United States citizens, and we're going to everything's going to be made in the United States. And so all the socialists are thinking, woohoo, great, loads of jobs, and Biden's going to give all this money to...
I don't think socialists are thinking that at all, but go on.
Yeah, well, anyway, the socialists generally think that it is a positive...
That's liberalist economics, anyway.
Right.
Like, that's Keynesian,
anyway,
maybe Friedman.
I'll complete the example that I was going to give. So the problem here is that your bolts and everything for bridges and infrastructure, you've not only made the project more expensive, but you're also bidding up the prices of the resources America for other projects. So now what you're doing, you're getting artificial allocation of resources, because Biden's coming along and saying, no, you're not going to get the cheapest steel because you're going to find it from a place which has got the best price. No, you're going to get it in the USA regardless of whether that's expensive or not. And you're going to employ people in the USA regardless of whether that's the best thing to do or not. So he's allocating resources to the USA, and by doing that, you're using infinite amounts of public money, basically this inflationary money printing money, and that's bidding up all of the resources in the US. So other entrepreneurs can't afford those resourses. So you're monopolizing resources.
Look, I'm not disagreeing that, like, the Biden, and I'm not even promoting Biden's. I'm not trying to defend Biden's economic policies at all. And I think like, the reality is that, yeah, it's like a form of Keynesian, or like Friedman, like probably like more Keynesian economics. Like, I get it. Like, and it's gonna what?
Keynesian economics is Satan.
Well, I mean, like that's one way to look at it. I mean, I don't think that it's Satan. I think that Friedman economics is pretty bad as well, to be honest. I don't think any of the capitalist economic systems have been pretty decent in the end. I think they all lead to like incredible amounts of what's the word, like inequality, and and the alienation of the worker. Anyway, you can pump as much money into the system as you want, and you can create as wealthy of employees as if you want, in theory, but that's not going to correct the issue of them being essentially having no personal autonomy. So, like, this is the point, right? If we want to, like, actually talk about the prop, and the prop is in this scenario, like Biden's economic policies be damned, right? I don't care. I don't actually care about Biden's economic policy. I don't think there's a socialist alive that's advocating for Joe Biden as like this the socialist like God King. You know what I mean? He's not even Bernie, and half the socialists are casting him out off the ship. You know what I mean? So like the reality is that like nobody's defending Biden. I don't think the capitalists hate him, the socialists hate him. The only people that want him is the liberals, and they're just capitalists who don't want the downsides of capitalism. Now, like, and the thing is, at least Biden's on one side. He's willing to lose profits in order to try and increase well-being, like social well-being, right? Now, that's at least, somewhat admirable, maybe. I mean, it's all somewhat regulatory capture, and I think he's probably just owned by private enterprise mostly in the first place. But in reality, he's trying to increase, the the well-being of workers. If you take somewhere like, like China, and I'm sorry to bring China up again, but let's say the well-being of workers isn't something that's really being considered, even though they have these socialist policies and are elevating people out of poverty. They were willing to sacrifice like 38 million people, in the time of Mao, for the benefit of the state. The whole point of it is it's a state ideology over individual, individual outcome. It's not about the people. And they're both capitalism. They're both.
That's not capitalism. Maoism isn't capitalism.
I would say Maoism. I'd say what we see in China today is certainly capitalism, and I'd say that it's the marriage of capitalism and communism, and something that's quite grotesque. But the thing is that
Maoism is actually communism.
Yeah, I know what Maoism is.
It's not capitalism, dude. So I don't know why you keep trying to slur China and capitalism.
But do you think China's capitalist or communist?
I think the economy is fundamentally operating on free markets. Meanwhile, because that's how they got their huge economic growth is with free markets. But they've got a really weird social ideologies going along beside it, which is obviously communist in nature, which I'm not a fan of at all. But their economy is largely capitalist.
Yeah, so I'd say that their economy is largely capitalist. I would agree, and I think that their government is communist, and I think that socialists have to own that. I think that we have to accept that this is the end of a certain ideological foundation from which Maoism has led into this. I don't think that it's been like a reversion of Maoist ideology. I think that we have to accept that this is essentially what Marx, Lenin, and this is what I thought you would probably go down, like Marxism led to Leninism, and Leninism led to Stalinism, and Stalinism's led to Maoism, and all of this is horrible, which is it is, and something that we need to own, and when you say like Marxism is a disease, it's like Marxism, like this is what I would argue, that Marxism is a medicine, right? And in being a medicine, it was used to treat a disease. I'd say capitalism and the negatives of capitalism more so, or the disease, the exploitation of the worker. These are the things, like the symptoms of capitalism from which Marx was pointing out, as the physician, he's going like, look, like the exploitation of the worker, the allocation of like the means of production to a certain class of individuals who act as, a ruling class upon the population, and, deal out, orders in order to maximize their own value, whilst, excising the majority of the population to servitude. I think that's exactly what Marx was doing. He's like, he's trying to treat what he saw was a negative within society, but then the ideologies become applied and over-applied, and it's a negative, right? It's anti-capitalism, and in becoming anti-capitalism, it literally it's a bad faith. In terms of Leninism, and then in terms of Stalinism, it lost the Hegelian foundations of the theory. It the rejection of the negation of negation, for example, in Mao, led to this idea of like this living contradictions, which would always be, essentially ruled by the most powerful ideology. So you could have capitalism and communism in the same place, really, if you look at the on contradictions in Mao. And I think that this is kind of how his philosophy is essentially went on. It's not that we have a capitalist communist system in China in this kind of living contradiction, because that's exactly what his theory talks about in terms of the unity of opposites. They're united not because that one is simply overcome by the other in terms of power, but there is always that contention, even in terms of like governmental control. Like I think he even said that each individual branch of government could be divided into two. and he saw everything as divisible and constant and divisible infinitely, in this like infinite negation. And so he never actually, reached the point in which it was proposing something which was new and different, in which capitalism and socialism were no longer given that the same meaning. There was something prior rather than something like continuing. And so that's why I say that like Maoism is not Maoism, like contemporary China is a communist capitalist hybrid, ideologically. And I think that, like, if you look at it like that, I think that, like, it's something that we have to own as both capitalists and Marxists or socialists, because the reality is that the negatives of both ideological traditions, taken to their extreme, worker exploitation, whilst abstract notions of right governed by a vanguard political party, totalitarian regime. It's unfortunate, and I think that, like, this is kind of where we are today. And in terms of like I think the American kind of capitalism, that's going off the rails in terms of like forms of individualism. It's like how individual can we get? Well, it depends. Like like liberalism in America now is really like what was republicanism like only 50 years ago, and everything's went rightward from that point on. So, like, I think that we need to be like kind of clear on the economic systems that we have today.
Yeah, right. I feel like we're spiraling off to Pluto a bit in the conversation, because we've been going for a while now, and literally I've got my notes here, and they're fairly long, and we've only got to the second sentence, which is a definition, and so I don't feel like we've really even started.
I agree, but I do think that your definition was contentious.
Right. So we can't even agree on what socialism and capitalism even are. So it's a bit of a difficult one for this debate, because I don't know how we can debate something that we can't agree on what it is.
Because you want to say that socialism has to be statism, and you also want to say that capitalism has to be free market. But then we agreed that
the way that I see capitalism is that capitalism is about private property ownership and free markets. They are the foundations of capitalism. And then socialism,
I would have agreed with private enterprise and private owners of the means of production, but then free market not necessarily. Like,
but how can you have capitalism without a free market? That's bonkers.
But I mean, that is actually like liberalism. I mean, like, there are like, would you say that Keynesian's non-capitalist?
Yeah, of course I would.
No, that's ridiculous. Like, what would you have called Keynesian economics then?
Socialism.
You can't be serious.
Yes, because it's redistribution and interventionism. Capitalism is non-interventionism.
That's not true. That is absolutely not true. Like no one defines capitalism as non-intervention.
Look, capitalism, like the historic, like classical capitalism, like we're talking about, like when we talk about Austrian economics and stuff like this, right? We're going to be talking about capitalism, meaning free markets, private property ownership. And when we're going to be talking about socialism, we're going to be talking about government intervention and artificially redistribution resources in the economy. I don't know. Maybe you've just got like some weird philosophical definitions. My definitions are economic definitions. I'm talking economics here. You might.
But if you talk about else. Where would you? Like, let's say if you bring up something like market socialism, where would that fit in that? Would it just be capitalism for you?
Market socialism is deformed capitalism. Yeah.
Deformed capitalism.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about like a mixed economy?
Yeah. It's just deformed capitalism, and Keynesian economics can be capitalist or socialist depending on how much intervention there is. Because essentially, what socialism is that's why I started off with the extremes. So extreme A, capitalism, completely laissez-faire, free markets, private property ownership. Socialism, the extreme, is centralized statism, government intervention and distribution of resources, to the point where the end result of that would be like the state owns everything, and free markets don't exist, and you're not allowed to like work for a wage and stuff like that, like what we've seen throughout history, right? On the extremes of socialism, just the contrast, for example, between West and East Germany, we've seen a similar thing, and then we can say one side was socialist and one side was capitalist. right? It's quite easy to see. But now you seem to be hitting me with like trying to say that social democracies are now socialist. But everyone knows that social democracies are capitalist. So I just
No,
don't
I'm
know.
not. No, I'm not trying to say that social democracies are socialist, actually. But like, what I'm trying to say is that I don't think that like the Austrian, I will hands in the air. I don't know very much about the Austrian School of Economics, and I certainly am aware that that is not the limits of the definitions of capitalism and socialism in economics itself, though. Like classical economics, neoclassical economics, like when we talk about capitalism and socialism, like if you want to define it as such, then we're talking about separate mechanisms than what I would be talking about, and we're going to talk straight past each other. So
Yeah, that's why I wanted to start off with the definitions. And as I'm 100%, I'm an Austrian, right? When it comes to economics, like I'm going to be putting the definitions on the table, which I'm most comfortable talking about, which I feel highlights what I want to get at the most clearly, which I did at the start of the debate. But I feel like we've just been debating the definitions this whole time, not actually talking about the, not actually having the actual conversation.
But we can move on to like why you think like, so for example, if we could just nail down like a partial definition that we're both happy with. So for example, I don't think socialism has to be statism. Excuse me.
Well, yeah. So you talked about cooperatives, but I just showed you quite clearly how you were just talking about capitalism.
But I don't think that you've showed us quite clearly how I'm talking about capitalism at all, because I would say that the limitations of what can exist within the market are determined by social organizations. So, for example, the market would not be free in terms of what you would consider capitalism, and so could not be capitalism. So even on your own definition, it can't be capitalism, man, because it's not a free market.
Well, no. Of course, it's free market. You agreed.
How is it a free market? So, for example, I think
you agreed that they entered into an agreement freely, without coercion from the state. They entered into
what
an
agreements
agreement.
can exist within the market, though. Like, look at it like this: like, you would no longer allowed; it would be illegal to hire employees.
Yeah, that's
right.
Socialism, not capitalism.
But then yeah, I would agree, right? Which is why I would call it market socialism and not capitalism.
But where's the market? You've killed. There's no more market if it's illegal.
There is a market. It's just you can't hire an employee. You can only work as cooperatives.
Oh yeah, no, but that's just Well, that would be a form of socialism, right? That would just be like interventionism, making it illegal to.
It wouldn't. It wouldn't be a it would be a form of socialism, but it's not a form of statism.
That's
like
the same as minimum wage laws, right? It's just a minimum wage law. You've just raised the minimum wage.
Do you see minimum wage as just like socialist?
Yeah, minimum wage, 100% socialist.
I mean, I would agree that it was proposed by socialists, but I don't see minimum wage as socialist. I actually see it as the opposite of socialist. Socialists don't want wage at all.
Capitalist whatsoever. You can't have minimum wage in a true capital.
You
capitalist
can.
Economy. It makes no
I
sense.
think you can. I think Marx showed why you would need one in the first place, really, to maintain the certain class of individuals so that they could continuously, be exploited. It would be like macroeconomics.
It's a self-contradictory nonsense.
It's not really. It's not.
When you say macroeconomics, I'm assuming that your background in economics is Keynesian.
No, I mean, it's not that it's not Keynesian. I mean, I know more Keynesian economics than other forms of economics, but like in terms of economics, I'm to be honest, I'm very much a layman, and I need to do more work. That's self-confessed. 100%. I'm a philosopher, not an economist, and it's something that I definitely need to work on. But in terms of when I talk about macroeconomics, I'm literally pointing towards the big picture here. I'm saying that when we look at the large scale, outcomes, it's a macroeconomic technique in order to control so for example, we used to, in terms of Britain, ship laborers off to foreign countries in order to control the labor market. The minimum wage is also intervention in order to maintain that market in some respects. The capitalist class sometimes will act in a way that is not in its self-interest, and I think that's why state intervention sometimes actively bolsters capitalism. And I think that's why I would say that China's capitalist, and I'd say it's state intervention. So for example, the forex market, it controls the forex market and doesn't allow it to be controlled by the free standard of the market. Would you not say that was? Would you say that was capitalist or socialist?
Well, I think what you're hinting at there is the fact that the Chinese government want to keep the Chinese currency artificially low so that it's cheaper for Americans to buy Chinese goods. So what they're doing is the government are essentially manipulating the market to make China more competitive. So that is against that's against capitalist ideology too. That's interventionism, right? So
you would say that's socialist.
I would say that is a socialist policy. Yeah.
I just don't agree. I just do not.
I think.
But so you would say. So would you say that like the United States? Would you say that's like capitalist or socialist?
It used to be capitalist, and now it's getting very socialist.
Oh my God! You can't think that the United States is socialist.
Well, they're getting quite socialist with with California, for example, minimum wage, that's a socialist thing. Taxing the rich with progressive income, that's socialist. The sort of like government.
I certainly will not allow. I will
all of
certainly
these things are socialist policies, man. You can't
I
say
will certainly not allow you. I will certainly not allow you to gatekeep capitalism into such like free market capitalism, laissez-faire. No, absolutely not.
That's
no,
what capitalism is. You're a fan of Ayn Rand. Like Ayn Rand, just read what she said.
No. I am not one. I'm not a fan of Ayn Rand. I want to point that out. Certainly not a politic. I don't mind a virtue of
fan of some of what she says. I agree that you're not
a meta-ethic essay was okay.
Yeah,
okay. But I'm certainly not a fan of our politics.
But if you read the Fountainhead, like you know what capitalism is, like in the old school sense. I don't mean the new school sense of capitalism's bad, it exploits people. I don't mean that new whingy social justice warrior sense. I mean the original old school 100 years ago, people know economics. That sense of capitalism.
Look at it like this, right? Like you say, minimum wage is socialist, which I can kind of understand. Socialists do push it through.
Policy.
It's an interventionist policy. We can agree. I would say it's liberalism, right? I would say that it's 100% liberalism. Now,
but we're just injecting a new word into the mix when we don't have to. It's a socialist policy.
It is very necessary because liberalism is a form of central. It's central in terms of government intervention, but the maintenance of a market of a privately owned market, right? Like the movement from private ownership to worker ownership is the primary distinction between socialism and capitalism. Like that is unbelievably clear. Like people if you talk to some, not even if you talk to someone. So let's take the idea of a wage, like minimum wage. This is why it's necessary. So the capitalist who doesn't want minimum wage doesn't want it because he thinks that businesses will do better on low wages, which will ultimately, the blah 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 trickle down effect, free market economy. It's good for everyone, right?
That's not exactly it. I'll explain it.
Yeah, maybe not. But I'm just giving like an example of someone with an ideology. Then you got the socialist. So wages are evil. Wait a minute, one second. Wages are evil. Exploitation of labor, the bourgeoisie, proletariat, everyone needs to revolt, right? On the other side. Then you've got in the middle the person that's like, look, the market functions in terms of profit is good, but there can only be a level of justified inequality, and so we need to extract certain levels of labor back from, or wealth back from, the individual who's making all the profits in order to give to the lower classes so that they're able to maintain an adequate level of survival. That would be liberalism. It's like, yeah, capitalism's not bad, but capitalism has some problems that we're going to medicate with this symptomatic treatment. While socialism we need to change the
wait there a sec. I see what's happening now. What you're defining as liberalism, I'm defining as socialism.
Yes.
And what you're defining as socialism, I'm defining as Marxism.
But so you're just gonna wait. So you just say that Marxism. Well, I think that for example, Marxism, in terms of Marxism, Marx defines socialism as a stepping stone, towards communism. Yeah. And so would you say that? So what you define as socialism? So I would make the distinction between, depending on most, for example, Marxists actually, Marx sometimes conflated the words socialism and Marxism. Not Marxism and communism. It wasn't always actually wasn't always a stepping stone. I think Marx uses them interchangeably. I think Lenin, it might be the other way around, and then maybe Lenin, I think, uses them interchangeably. And then obviously it becomes like first stage and second stage communism, and that kind of thing. So in terms of like the literature, like I could agree that there is like the distinctions between socialism and communism are iffy, depending on like how you read it. But to say that
I'm
like,
going on the old school definitions, man. Like the old school Marx, like as you said, Marx said first socialism as a transition to ultimately what will be his brand of communism, right? Which will be a stateless, classless, moneyless society, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
that is the ultimate goal. You can't employ people, wage slave labor, etc. Illegal. That's Marxism.
No,
Right?
no. You see, no, I
Marxism.
would disagree. Like you can have, let's say, like one, like I don't think Marx gets, because there was socialists before Marx. So like
No, that's a stepping stone, right? But the socialist, before you get to Marxism, that's the socialism I'm talking about. But you're talking about liberalism to be socialism, which is confusing the matters. That when Marx says,
yeah, it might actually be. I think it is. I think it is Lenin. It might be Lenin who said that like it was the seven stone.
no, I think it was Marx did. Marx
I
said
don't know.
that.
I think it might have been. I think it might have been. I thought it was Lenin. I think it was at lower stage and higher stage communism.
Yeah,
maybe.
it's the initial stage is of the revolution is the socialism, and then the next stage is the communism. That's what Marx promoted. But his ultimate goal was the stateless, classless, moneyless society. So how do you have a moneyless society where you can employ someone and pay them a salary? You can't do that because you've not got money.
I think it was. I think it actually was Lenin who stepped, because I remember like even reading Zizek talk about how Lenin was. I think it was Lenin who came up with the idea of like separating out communism into stages.
Yeah, but that's because it originally was separated out into stages in the original formulation.
I don't think there was. No, I don't think there was.
I think that
no, sure. I think in Marxism, socialism and communism were like interchangeable, and I think in Lenin it became like low and high order communism, and then socialism was sometimes used in exchange of like low stage communism.
I'm just googling this here, just real quick. The Communist Manifesto summarizes Marx and Engels' theories concerning the nature of society and politics. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. It is also briefly featured their ideas on how the capitalist society, the capitalist society would eventually be replaced by socialism, and in the last paragraph, overthrow the social conditions which would lead to the communist revolution. So it's even in the Communist Manifesto that it would first be socialism, right?
I'll have to double check, but I'm sure it was Lenin. But it's irrelevant anyway. Not big deal.
It
still,
sort of is, because we need to know what we're talking about, right? So socialism that I'm talking about is interventionism and redistribution of wealth, right? Government intervention to redistribute wealth in society in the way that the state sees fit. And then capitalism is free markets, and Marxism is a classless, moneyless, stateless society, right? Which is what I would define something akin to anarcho-communism. But
look, like you've got economists like today, like Richard Wolff, for example, arguing for market socialism. You have people arguing for forms of socialism that aren't like stepping stone to the stateless, classless society. Things have changed in terms of the literature of socialism, considerably. And people, and like you've got people who like the anarcho syndicates, who aren't arguing for a form of like capitalism. They're arguing for a form of socialism and worker ownership built into the state. And they don't see that as a form of communism. In fact, the communists in Catalonia, for example, like betrayed the anarchists. So like I just don't see how you can always conflate, like even in history, like I'm sorry, but like the anarchists who are worker ownership were not doing capitalism. Like the guaranteed worker ownership is not capitalism. It's that goes against the private enterprise part of the definition. And then obviously they're not they're not social, they're not communists, because it's not a stateless, classless, moneyless society, and they're not heading towards that direction. They're not even wanting to go that direction necessarily, right? And so, like, and it's not statism particularly. So you seem to see it as like statism, as in, you know, collective community, you know, ownership, or like intervention, like beyond the point of in which it's like is socialism.
That's why I defined it.
And it's like, look, if I would
discussion.
I would, yeah. But I said, like, I don't agree. And then I give you examples of capitalist statism, you know, like you know, capitalist state intervention, you know, for the benefit of a certain capitalist class of individuals. And then you say that's socialism. I'm like, well, no, it's state intervention, but it's not.
Yeah, that's interventionism to redistribute wealth in a way which is the state sees fit. That's exactly like textbook socialism, in my view, and that's the textbook example which would be given in any like 100-year-old book on economics that you might read. Like, take for example, just like the masterwork Ludwig von Mises' Human Action. Like, if you read something like that, you will see capitalism and socialism described in these ways. And yeah, minimum wage is a socialist policy. Redistribution of the wealth from the richest in society is a socialist policy. Healthcare for all is a socialist policy. Education for all, mandated and subsidized by the state, is a socialist policy.
But like regulatory capture in order to prevent oligarchies from outcompeting you isn't socialist. Like, maybe socialism.
That's a socialist policy in the purest definition. In old school definitions, capitalism is free markets.
Like, describing it as purist, I don't think that anyone, like in normal discourse or in any political discourse, would consider that socialist at all. Like, that is a very pigeonhole definition.
Well, look, government intervention that redistributes wealth, it captures wealth from somewhere, taxes corporations, or does something, or even has a stealth tax through inflationary mechanisms or something like this, and takes that money and puts it into something that they think will benefit society. That's the definition of socialism. But taking money and redistributing it in society for the good of society in the way that the state sees the good of society. That is socialism.
The good of society. Now, if the end of the society is profit, and the consideration of private enterprise, maybe only a few private enterprise, and the state intervenes in order to maintain that power dynamic, you would see that as socialism. I'd like.
No, because they wouldn't redistribute the money for profit. Because why would they do that? They would just allow the government untaxed.
What do you mean? Well, why would they do that? Because, well, why wouldn't they? So wait a minute. You don't think that regulatory capture exists and that corporations actively use the government in order to prevent other corporations from outcompeting them?
Oh, look, we're talking about different things here. So we have taxation of corporations, and we redistribute that money to various purposes, whether the government thinks that they should spend that money on healthcare or building roads, or whether the government thinks that they should spend that money on incentivizing the competition or doing whatever manipulation they do in the otherwise free market to perform whatever change that they see fit in society. That is socialism. If you're saying that there's some lobbyist group, private interest lobbying the government to channel money from some private from some public pocket into the private sector to rub their hands together and cackle and smoke cigars, then that's not capitalism. That's crony capitalism.
You're literally defining the redistribution of wealth as socialist, and I think that is like
that's just a socialist policy. That's what socialism is: the redistribution of wealth in a society. That's why the clue is in the social bit. The clue is in socialism, right? The society has a redistribution of wealth.
I give you, well, one, right, it's not necessarily about the redistribution of wealth. It's actually, Marx specifically talks about the distribution of wealth. And obviously there are
wealth is just free markets, but the redistribution is taking what the free markets are doing, or taking money from somewhere and distributing it in the way that the government sees fit.
Right. I get that you're working on very limited definitions here, ones that I'm just not going to agree with. Like, I'm just not going to. Like, if I'm honest, like, I've never used anyone. I've never even heard of anyone talking in terms of these definitions. I don't know if anyone else has. I mean, maybe in that school of economics, fair enough. I think that there is huge flaws in using those definitions, particularly for the fact that I give you an example of the redistribution of wealth in order to let's say, for example, in relation to the subprime mortgages, the too big to fail, mentality. You see that as socialist.
Yeah, that bailout was 100% a socialist policy, right? Because the reason why they bailed the banks out is because they were like, oh, well, we can't disrupt the economy and we can't have people like all this money being lost. So we have to step in as the government for the good of society to bail out the banks. That's a socialist policy, dude. I don't know where the contention is here. It's very clear.
It wasn't done for the good. One, I don't think that it was done for the good of society so much, especially since even those individuals who were involved weren't, prosecuted. They were in some countries. I think they were prosecuted in the Netherlands, and I think they were made, essentially advisors to the government in the UK. But the reality is like this is certainly not socialism, man. This is just unbelievably I honestly, I've never heard of anyone using this kind of this redistribution of wealth is socialism, whilst and capitalism can only be free market. But then you'll define China as capitalist, even though they have state intervention. And
yeah,
honestly, I don't even know where to go.
I'm saying that China has got quite like fairly free markets. It's not that the government doesn't intervene at every step.
Has there ever been a pure capitalist society to you then? Like, has there ever been a real a capitalist laissez-faire society for you then?
Yeah, like when the United States was founded and they had the original constitution and it was like free trade, free markets. Of course, like back then, it was the closest thing to capitalism, if not the ideal of capitalism, and that's why the United States thrived and became the greatest nation on the planet. And now socialism has reared its ugly head and it's gone down the shitter.
So, do you think that anything could be banned from the market? Should be banned from the market?
No, you shouldn't just ban stuff from the market unless right. So we have certain fundamental rights and freedoms, right? So we have property rights. We have the right to liberty and life, right? Life, liberty, and property, right? So if you come and steal my shit, right? That's when the police step in because you've done something which is a crime. If you sell me poison and you kill me, then that's when the police step in because you've done something wrong. And if you do something which you enslave me or do something against my will or break a contract or do something which is going against the law, going against my liberty, then that's when the police step in when there's something wrong.
So breaching your ownership would be non-capitalist. So stealing, that's non-capitalist.
Yeah, stealing is not capitalist at all.
Okay. All right. I'm going to argue then that market socialism is capitalism plus, and that's what we should have, because the reality is that the production of a wage is fundamentally theft from that individual. You are stealing their labor. You're stealing the product of their labor.
No, you're not. How are you stealing anything? If I put an ad in the newspaper and say, who wants to come work for me for $10 an hour or $20 an hour or whatever, and someone turns up and says, yeah, I'd like to do that, they're entering freely into a fully balanced contract. There's nothing.
But we agree that there are limits in consent.
No,
yeah, so you can't.
There are no limits there.
No limits to consent. So you can consent to be a slave.
No, because the thing is, it's impossible to consent to be a slave because it's a contradiction in it itself. It's a self-contradiction.
I think there is a contradiction in wages.
Well, there's not a contradiction in wages because if you want to come and work with me and you want some money and you don't mind performing an action for that money, then we make a contract and that goes ahead. If you don't want to do that, you're free to not do that.
Okay, so I'll say that the individual who works for a wage is being paid because they are, in terms of private property, they're seen as private owners, and at the same time, when they produce a product, they are not treated as the owners of their own labor and having bodily autonomy, and so has undermined the concept of their private ownership. They are rented.
Not
They are
nonsense.
rented.
Nonsense. How that what they are people in Tesco's stocking the shelves? Are they beaten with whips?
No, they're rented.
What
They're rented.
crazy?
They're rental property.
Who's beaten with a
No
whip?
one said that.
Right?
You can have coercive forces that aren't physical violence for one. So, for example, the inability to maintain like an adequate level of livelihood for your family unless you do the job, unless you accept the exploitation. And ask anyone in Tesco whether they think they're being taken the piss out of, and I'm pretty sure that they'll tell you that they are.
Yeah, well, then they have the right to leave. But it's normally government intervention, which buggers up the
And
whole economy
the
in the
right,
first place,
the right,
so that it
the
becomes
right to leave
unprofitable
and
for
go
unskilled
where
skilled labour. We used to
the
have
the
way
right,
more
the right.
unskilled labour. But, like, for example, when you go into a petrol station, back in the day, someone used to come up to you, and still, if you go like this to the south of Italy or south of Spain or something, go to the petrol station, someone will run out, they'll put the petrol in your car for you, they'll wash your screen, they'll ask you if you need anything. But if you go to England, no one's going to come out the Sainsbury's petrol pump and
Oh Christ!
fill up your car. Of course not. Do you know why? Because the unskilled labour that perform that job have been priced out of the market because of minimum wage laws and because of this and because of that. But the people who would have come out of school and have actually benefited and learned how to show up on time, learned responsibility, and learned and hang out with the mechanics and learn how to, in their free time whilst they're working on that job, learn how to fix cars and get into mechanics and actually work their way up the job ladder. The government have come along and said, in
Working
their
their way up
infinite
the job
wisdom,
ladder.
and said,
I
no,
think
it's illegal. You cannot work. You
how
cannot
have they
work for
worked?
this much. It's illegal.
What do you mean they're working their way up the job ladder? You've just said like if anything, you've just showed that the like what was like unskilled labor now has to like skill itself in order to compete against other skilled labor, and so the entry levels of the market have increased. So now if you're going in as unskilled,
Look. Of course, you need to increase your skill, because otherwise, if you can only offer unskilled labor, then it's abundant. Unskilled labor is abundant. I can find anyone to push a button, but I can't find anyone to design me a rocket. So if I need someone to design me a rocket, I can't get Bob down the street who's 16 years old. I need to get a specialist, and that specialist skill is rare,
exactly.
it's scarce.
Yeah, and then they get paid more in terms of the value that they produce, and that can be socialist.
Because it's scarce, and I have to bid a high wage as an employer to get them to work for me.
But no. This is the thing: you do not pay them a wage. You don't have to pay them a high wage. Like, so, for example, you can have scarce, skilled, competent people that are paid nowhere near what they actually deserve because of the conditions from which they come from. So you've got people coming from countries from which the conditions are lower and they'll work for less. Or you've got people who are, essentially, willing to be exploited. And like this happens all the time, even in terms of like scientists, like in corporations that produce like drugs, even like pharmaceutical corporations. They're not the ones taking home the biggest amounts of money. It's the CEOs. And I really do not think that the scarcity of CEOs and the skill of CEOs has anything to do with the value that the much that they're getting paid.
Dude,
I think that it has to do with who allocates the wealth. Like,
CEOs.
it is a form.
It's a form. You just don't understand what.
I do.
Managerial people in a corporation, that what they actually do. It seems you just think that they turn up to work in a shirt, sit around all day, maybe make an entry on an Excel spreadsheet and get paid £1 million a year. You just got doubt
really hard.
what people actually do at that level.
I think CEOs work really hard usually to try and make sure that they cut costs as much as possible, and that includes paying the least tax possible and exploiting as much value from the labor force as possible.
That's not all they do. Like, if you're just like saying that all managerial level people or CEOs or upper echelons of any company, all they do is sit around optimizing efficiency. They probably don't even sit around optimizing efficiency. They probably have someone working below them in a large company scale to optimize efficiency of the labor. That's they're not going to walk around beating sticks and stuff like this.
I think that the value that's
not how it works.
Honestly, I don't think that the value that they produce it correlates at all with how much they're paid.
You don't know what the hell they do. I don't know what the hell they do, because every company is different. How can you just broadly say every company in the world, which is
because I would say that the value produced is by the labor force. If it's a productive value, it's by the labor force producing whatever it is that's being sold. In terms of if it's purely by if the value that they produce is in speculation, in terms of like in terms of the the shares and that, then it's a lot to do with the PR team, the advertise, and so on. If the value's being produced in terms of a service, it's who's providing the service, it's how the service is being provided. That's where the value is being produced. That's where the trade is occurring. That is where the money is coming from.
Right. So we could just fire Elon Musk, and we would have had all these great projects, because we could have just hired
I honestly couldn't give a
unskilled
fuck what
labor.
happened to Elon Musk. All I see him is privatizing space, right? Like I don't really care.
No, look,
like
Elon Musk is accelerating. Is one of the most genius people who is currently alive, dude. Do you not understand what Elon Musk has done? Firstly, he has created the electric car for the mass market, which no one thought would happen, right? And now he's put like the infrastructure in privately for all of the charging facilities across like half the world, which is just insane. Then he's not only completely made a huge dent on the saloon market, he's now entering the truck market, right? And everyone's going ape shit about that. He's now like designed rockets, and he's participating. Like he's offering like Wi-Fi to secluded areas, to remote areas, because he's got satellites to provide internet access. Something that the public sector would never have been able to achieve in the time space that he did. And now he's done solar roofs. So to power all these cars and accelerate to transition to green energy, because now he's going to have solar panels on all the houses in America. He's single-handedly bit like the savior for climate change and green renewable energy, right? And not only that, he's managed to do it in a way where he has cut out all the middlemen in the battery production and gone straight to mining in the most efficient, least exploitative, environmentally sound way possible. And then after all of that, now he's going to be saving the inefficiencies in cryptocurrencies because of the proof of work, because of all the like waste and heat and energy required in mining cryptocurrencies that use proof of work. He's now going to be saving all of that because he's going to be having an update pushed to this is speculation at this point, but it is basically going ahead. Is doing an update to all of the Tesla roofs, right? So that they can then sell, instead of selling to the national grid, they can sell to the Bitcoin miners, right? Which is just going to perpetuate the cryptocurrency revolution, bring down the prices of transactions, make it more green. So he's single-handedly, like, completely revolutionized, had a huge solution for climate change. Like, and now he's assisting in the cryptocurrency revolution,
from what I've
which
seen,
is
like,
going to save so many people from failing currencies around the world.
Like, let's be honest, Tesla, like, as cars, they can, like, he's introduced cars to the market that are, electric, great, happy to see it. Competing against oil corporations, cool, whatever, really nice to see, needs to happen. Don't think he's ultimately pushed them out at all. He hasn't like dominated the market to the point in which green energy's become the standard. He's literally like he's literally just got the bougiest car, one of the bougiest cars. That's like he's created a price point which is available to enough people that it makes him a shit ton of money, but not available to the majority of the population. Like not even close. In terms of like from what I'm aware, I'm not even sure if the batteries are even ecologically that friendly. Although I'm still a fan.
No, they are, dude. They're much better, and it's going to be recycling 100%.
Yeah, I've heard that we're talking about recycling batteries, which is pretty cool. So yeah, like I've not really got a problem with the design of the cars or anything like that. Like, yeah, shit. Like, I mean, like if I was gonna buy like a 70,000 or 60,000 pound car, yeah, I'd probably think that the Tesla is the best one on the market, right? But the average household, who like, especially like your average individual driving cars, hasn't got 60,000 pound to slap down on a table, man. And it's like the price point. I think it is dropping now, and hopefully
it's dropping.
It's like, and hopefully, no, wait a minute. Like, well, no, I don't think it's extremely affordable. I think that's a bit of a like it's more expensive than a Mercedes.
No, it's not. Of course not. It's about the same price as like a oh, what have we got in the UK? Like the Focus, the Ford Focus, like a good Ford Focus is about the same price as the entry level Teslas now. It's really dropping down, dude.
I thought the entry level Teslas were like 30,000-40,000.
There's a new Tesla that's like $30,000 or something. I don't know the exact prices from the top of my head, but it's getting cheaper all the time, dude. And they're bringing out a new range, which is
Okay, and like I don't have an issue with the car. Like they're doing great, yeah. And like he's privatizing space and all that thing, right? Like I have no problem with that, and I don't think that he's single-handedly bringing this around. Like, so one, I think that he exists in a corporation which employs considerable amounts of intelligent, highly skilled individuals who own nothing compared to him, and have been exploited in terms of their intellectual capabilities. For one, like they might design the cars, but then like essentially get a one-off fee in relation to or not even a one-off fee. They might get paid a salary.
but
So like,
that's up to them, dude. That's up to them.
it's
They can
not
have shares in the
oh
company.
my
Like, for
God.
example, people who have worked at Tesla, who found that even the founder of Tesla, one of the co-founders of Tesla before Elon Musk actually came in, he quit, right? But he still owns shares in the company, and he's got very rich off of the fruits of the company, even after he left. So
Yeah,
it
but like what I'm
depends what
saying
you
is
do.
that
It's the free market.
Elon Musk invested an considerable amount of capital into an idea. That's great. Like, yeah, he's a capitalist who's invested his money into a corporation which has earned a considerable amount more money in the end.
You
100%.
think he just chucked
But
money at a company and walked off?
well, I think that he's not just chucked. No, I don't think that he's just chucked money into the company. I think that he's had some engagement with it, but I don't think that he's responsible for it. No, I don't think that. I wouldn't give Tesla's overall value production to Elon Musk. Absolutely not. No.
I would say without Elon Musk, we wouldn't have the revolution of the electric car industry that we have now. He was the
I mean, like, how
catalyst
do we
for
falsify
that.
that, man? Like, there's no way that we can go like whether the car would have like actually like. So, for example, if we had someone with equal amount of like, if we had the capitalist investment into Tesla or another corporation which was had the same sort of individuals hired, would we have had this outcome? I have absolutely no idea, and that's absolutely unfalsifiable.
We can actually it's unfalsifiable in terms of deduction, but in terms of we can just look at like what people are saying, what his contributions are. We can look at people who work at the company. We can look at different people actually talking about this. We've had other EV companies before receiving funding and failing, right, going completely out of business. Not only did the company not go out of business and make a profit, but it's become one of the biggest companies in the world. It's become
So he's a successful capitalist. I don't
for the EV revolution.
Just because he's a successful being a successful capitalist, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there is nothing in, let's say, the allocation of capital, like the focus on like investment, the way in which individuals like who you employ, even like these are the things that are considered in what makes a good capitalist. But I don't think that means that they are responsible for all the wealth produced by those employees who they employ. I certainly don't think that means that they're responsible for the entirety of the corporation's value production. I think that's just an absolute equivocation. Like you own in the world, like in terms of private property, how would you define private property? And this is kind of the point. So if we talk about wages, like how would you define private property in the first place? Because I would say wages are wage slavery. Now you say like because they can work somewhere else, it's not slavery. I disagree, but
you're just defining using a loaded definition.
I haven't, because we haven't defined it yet. So like
you put slavery. You've said employment is slavery. Like if that's not loaded, I don't know what the hell it is.
I said that I would describe wages as wage slavery, but we can get onto that. How would you define private property?
Well, in the same way that most sensible people would define it as well, like something that I have exclusive right to and I own, right? So
what demarcates, like, for example, an object, like non-owned object, from an object, like an owned one?
Well, I own my own body, right? Because I'm just going with the Lockean sense.
I'm very happy you went for the Lockean one.
Well, yeah. What else? Because I own my own body. I own, like, if I want to say, I could even say, in like a traditional Lockean sense, I could even say I own what I make with my hands, right?
Yeah.
So and then, but then this is the error that I think that you make, which the error that I don't make here in terms of capitalism. I own the labor which I produce with my own hands at the shoe factory, right? And I'm selling you that labor. If I did not own that labor, I could not sell it to you, but I'm selling it to you. But you're then saying it's slavery, it's exploitation because I'm stealing it from it. No, you're not stealing the labor. I'm producing the labor which is mine, coming from my own body, and I own this labor. This is mine, and I'm selling it to you for £15 an hour, and I'm free to do that because
I
I have
think,
my bodily autonomy.
if I'm honest, I think you're the one making the mistake. The labor isn't an object owned by you. The labor is an aspect of you. What is produced of the labor is the product and the object owned by you. That would be the Lockean position.
When I go home in the evening, I don't come home with a bag of my labor. Like my labor isn't something like tangible. The product that I produced from my labor is something tangible, but that's not my labor, right?
I agree.
Right. So
that's why exactly what I'm saying. There's no one, in terms of ontology, labor is you. It is your actions in the world. Like, it is simply your actions in the world.
Yeah, right. But I own that.
Yeah, I mean, because you own yourself.
Anything that I own.
Yeah.
Apart from my own body.
But this is exactly. But that's it. That's it. That's the whole Lockean position. You can't sell yourself.
Yeah, you can't sell yourself,
right?
Of course, because
so if labor is you,
even in the Kantian sense, because if we say, look, I own myself, but I'm going to sell myself, then the second that I've sold it, I don't own myself anymore. But then, it doesn't make sense because then,
it breaks because you couldn't have sold yourself if you didn't own yourself. So if you don't own yourself, then you can't follow through with the
So it creates a contradiction in the Kantian sense. So of course I can't sell myself, but I can sell my labor.
So but this is the point. I'm saying labor is you, and that was in the Lockean sense. Labor is you. The labor, when you labor in the world, it is you producing change within reality, right? What is changed is not you. That's ontologically separate. But your actions within reality are you. That's why you own whatever's produced, because when you mix your labor, quote unquote, into the object, you create a product, and part of that product is the result of your actions, and that's where your ownership comes from. And that's
in a naive Lockean sense of farming.
A naive Lockean sense. Oh, please enlighten me.
Yeah, no, that's in terms of I'm gonna rock up on a farm in the newfound Americas, and I'm gonna chop down the trees, and I'm mixing my labor into the environment, and therefore the environment becomes
I think Locke actually gives Locke literally gives the example of mixing, your labor in terms of producing, a product, and obviously he gives the example of bodily autonomy. And I don't think there's anything naive about this. Even ontologically, you even said there is no such thing as a bag of your labor. There is not labor isn't a thing in and of itself. It doesn't exist as an object. Labor is the actions of individuals. So I don't understand why you think that labor is something to labor. The labor that you don't. All right, he has the labor. You don't hand them a bag of labor and take the £10. No, you produce actions in the world. You have to be there to labor.
I can't hand someone a bag of intellectual property either. Some things are non-tangible, but they still exist.
But you're the one that you want. I'm making the distinction, that the point that it's one. I mean, I'm very contentious about intellectual property anyway. I mean, I think that can you own an idea? I'm not gonna lie, I'm on the fence. But in terms of labor, it's your action. It's what you actually do. It's not something that is. It's not like a transient object. You know what I mean? It's actually what you do in the world. It's not separate from you. Locke didn't see your labor there's you, your labor, and the object or the product. It's you laboring, producing a product. you see what I mean? You labor on an object to produce a product. Like that's not
Right,
like
but
this
but it
naive
doesn't.
Lockean sense. That is actually John Locke.
We impart our actions into the world, right? But it doesn't mean I can't sell these things. Like John Locke has got nothing wrong with selling things or
I don't
laboring
think
for
that John
something.
Locke. I don't think John Locke took like his classically liberal position to its conclusion. I'd say that this position in terms of private property can conclude only in socialism, in worker ownership. You cannot be a wage slave, and I would argue, or a worker, an employee, because that alienates you from the product of your labor. That is actually the Marxist kind of like definition. I mean, the four types of alienation. You're alienated from your ownership.
I think this idea of banning employment and having this socialist cooperative vibe is probably the most unfair thing I can ever imagine in business. So
How is it unfair?
I'll explain.
Look, before you get on to the fact that it's like, you can talk about whether you think private property is fair or not in a second, but I want to show that this is the end of private property. That what private property is bodily autonomy in terms of labor applied to reality constituting ownership. So someone laboring at McDonald's produces a product, and that product, they own a proportion of it, and they must trade that product for then like a value. Now, in a wage, they are given a set amount of money regardless of how many products they produce, unless it's piece wages, in which case they're given a set amount of money regardless of the value of the product they produce, and they aren't actually being treated as owning that product. They can't like decide like, no, actually that this is mine. Like, so like, for example, if they were to if you were to like go, actually no, I'm not going to sell you it for that price. Absolutely not. You can't do that. You can walk out the corporation and not work there tomorrow, but you can't take home whatever you produce, for example. Like, and pay the difference. Like, oh, sorry, so I've produced like I've produced these chips. I'm going to take these home because I don't want you to own the product of my labor, but I'll pay you for the product of that aspect of labor that came before us and the value that was produced there. That would be fair enough. But they can't do that.
It's just problematic on so many levels. Let's take, for example, John, who makes apple pies, and he makes apple pies in his own kitchen. And Bob comes along, or you come along, and say, I like that apple pie that you've just made. And he's like, oh, I want to eat this myself. But he says, no, I'll give you 50 quid. And he says, well, actually, I value 50 quid more than I value this apple pie. So here's the apple pie. I quite happily take the 50 quid. So you think that that's okay because he owns the product of his labor, and then he sells the end product to the consumer, and that's fine. But now let's say we decide, you're at home and you got the same 50 quid, and but you can't be bothered to go over to John's. John doesn't have any flour to make the cake, so you ring him up and say, look, can I have an apple pie? And he's like, no, I don't have any flour. And you say, well, I've got loads of flour over here, I've got all the ingredients you want, so come over to mine and make it. And he's like, yeah, sure. So he comes over to yours, he uses your means of production, and then gives you the apple pie. You pay him for his time, 50 quid for his time making it. No, that's now exploitation. It's exploitative. It's slave labor because he's used the other kitchen. So it's now geographically contingent. So exploitation and slavery is now geographically contingent on which kitchen you use. So it's
not
just
geographically contingent. The point of the matter is, so if you were to arrange, let's say, a contract with them, like kind of like, even if it's like spoken, like, oh, John, can I come over? If you, all right, I wanted to make an apple pie, I couldn't. All right, well, you come to mine, I make me an apple pie while you're on, and you can use my kitchen and that. No problem. Yeah, there's no problem. That's a fair trade, right? The issue is
that's what all fair trades are, and that's what free markets are.
No.
Yes.
No, wages are not the same as a trade. It's not the same as like when a consumer goes out and buys a product. It's not.
No, it's the same. You have labor to sell, right? It's like, imagine if we caricature this and break it down on a really simple level.
Labor to sell.
No,
No, this is the point.
let's
You do not have
caricature.
labor to sell.
What?
You have product of your labor to sell.
Oh, look. So you
So
you have
if
no
you were to
money.
agree,
You have no
like
money,
if like look,
and
look
so
let's say
you want
you have
money. You have no.
let's say
Listen,
no
let's talk
no
one
if
by
that,
one, dude.
oh my god, like
Look, you have no money. You want money. So you hold up a sign saying, "I have labour to sell for £20 an hour." Someone comes up, I come up to you and say, "Oh, well, I need unskilled labour, but I'm only willing to offer £10 an hour." Then you say, "Oh, well, I'm not willing to go to 10." So they decide, "Oh, well, let's meet at the middle and we'll do 15 an hour." So a trade has been made. You sell the labour and I buy the labour, and that's the transaction.
okay,
It's a free market.
now imagine you're actually placed into a labor market where you're actively now where an individual's time is competed against another individual's time in order to gain the lowest possible rate in order to fulfill the profit margins of a certain other class of employers. Now that's the labor market. Now imagine that people enter that labor market only because they would die otherwise, or they would live a standard of living which we would consider unethical, as in unjustified, as in it would be highly unequal, and place them into a situation from which, if they rejected laboring under these conditions, they would otherwise be subsequent to all the harms of nature, right? And that cannot be avoided.
Yeah. You
That is
need
the
to get
system.
up your ass. You need to get off your ass and actually do something in this world.
I think that's.
Typically,
I think that absolutely.
back in the day, dude.
Get off. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Get off. You can get off. You can get off your ass and go and do something in the world and go and work a 15-hour shift at some fucking awful job and get paid tuppence. The amount of like how hard you work has, even you yourself said, has nothing to do with with how much you get paid.
Yeah, of course it doesn't.
So why? Oh, you get your ass. You work harder. You work smarter. You work better. It doesn't matter because you're not the one that allocates the wages.
But dude, if you don't want to sell your time for money, then don't do that.
Then you can die. I mean, yeah,
I
absolutely. You can die. You can leave this economic system via your own mortality.
Yeah, but right. So firstly, you can start your own company, and you can offer value in the way that you want to offer value, because all it is value. You're offering value. Whether you're employed, you're offering value in terms of your time in exchange for value, which is money, or you can offer value in a different way and get money, which is value in another way, right? All it is exchange of value. That's what capitalism is: exchanging value in free markets with private ownership, right? So if I decide that I don't like working this shit job that you've described, that I get tuppence and I have to work 16 hours a day, well, I won't do that job. I'll do some other job. And if there isn't any other job, it's because some interventionist policy from the government has come along, shat on the economy, and prevented me from working because they've outlawed my labour because I'm unskilled.
Labor has been run into the floor so much because there's a surplus of labor.
Because of the public sector
you could have
up in the economy.
You could have a private sector from which labor has become so oversaturated that the economy can't function anymore.
Well, this is why people skill and reskill. I've reskilled. I've reskilled a bunch of times in my life.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, but okay. So okay. When the education sector is private as well, and you don't have the money to pay for that, then what? How do you reskill?
No, the education sector used to be fantastic, and it's been run into the ground because of the student loans. Because before, it was even worse in the UK because there wasn't.
I was going to say it was free before that. So please tell us how student loans have no. Socialize the system.
Yeah, okay. This will take 1 minute to, well, hopefully less than 60 seconds actually to unpack. Before, it was free, but because it was free and it was subsidized by government money, they put a cap on the amount of people who could actually attend. But that was bad because it wasn't fair, because you couldn't come if you wanted to if you didn't get in under the cap. So it was actually a really unequal system. So they're, oh shit, how can you solve this? So then, instead of just letting it go to free markets, which have actually made education of a higher quality and at a lower price, they said, no, let's give people access to government honoured backed student loans. So now they can get huge student loans and pay the tuition fees, and then the education can be as expensive as it needs to be because we've got these huge loans which are like more mortgages
but
that the
like,
students need to take out, and now
yeah,
we're
but
going to
like,
remove the
okay,
cap,
yeah,
so
but
everyone has
I
the
would say
right to
that's
education.
capitalist for one.
Everyone
I'd
has
say
the right to education, but now it's going to be hugely expensive
I
and
would,
not
I would
even
have,
that good.
I would have said that was capitalist for one, and two,
No, that's
like,
socialist.
well, no, that is the point of contention of this debate.
Well, like
But two,
education for all, that's socialist.
like, no, well, one, it's more of like debt for all.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why it's
But the thing
horrible
is,
socialism.
like, what I would say is that if we look at the let's say the student loan situation, right? Like the issue of education for all isn't bad. Like the idea of reskilling, as you said, could be necessary for an economy to function, right? At least to the point in which an individual can maintain a level of livelihood without, being subsequented to essentially, too many people have been born. There's too many workers, not enough jobs. Sorry, you're not getting employed. Unemployment means that there's no like safety catch and people die. Like safety net and people die. Like that is the harsh reality of a free market where people could be free to die in it. You've been born at the wrong time. Sorry, John. If you can't reskill yourself because you can't afford the education, well, that's too bad. Like, you can't afford the education. You say that, all right, well, like free education's not good because, it capped how many people were able to enter it. And you said that was bad because it capped how many people were able to enter it. But then you said, oh, but no, what's worse is that education for all has led to
A huge student loan bubble.
a student loan problem, which is fair enough. Perhaps there is a huge student loan problem, right? And I don't disagree there. But then you say that's escalated prices, and I think it has in many ways. I do actually think it has elevated prices, but prices elevate anyway. Like look at the United States loan.
Wait.
Look
Prices
at
don't
the
elevate
United.
anyway.
Look at
The public sector elevates.
Wait a minute.
Government intervention elevates prices.
Look at the private sector in the United States. It's been elevated much higher than the UK or much higher than Europe for a long time. Like there are so for example, you can go and get like a degree for like I think it's like 900 a year in like Belgium. In terms of the United States, it could cost 30,000 a year. Like the reality and student loans, from what I'm aware, in the United widespread. So I don't think
huge amount of student loans in
US.
Almost everyone's
I don't think that the word. I was going to say I don't think the word is widespread. But maybe you're right there. But I think and don't get me wrong, I do think that elevates prices. I don't even disagree with that. I don't even think.
Well, there you go.
But I don't even think that's socialist. I don't think that's capitalist. Socialists would be
you nationalize it,
by definition, you nationalize it, and we allow people to enter. Based on like essentially how many people, like who needs it, why they need it, that kind of thing. That would be socialist. Capitalist would be like, okay, we provide a universal commodity, and we foot the bill in order to pay a class of individuals who want to sell a product when people don't have the money.
That's not capitalist at all.
Credit is a capitalist invention. Credit is a capitalist invention, not a socialist one.
Look. The student loans have meant that public policy intervention has given it. Dude, stop interrupting, man. I can't get sentences out. The socialist policies have meant that now everyone has access to education. A socialist policy. Bernie Sanders, like, eat your heart out, socialist policy. Right. Now, that means because of the intervention, we give student loans to everyone so they can afford to go to university. Or we could just make it all free, but then we have to have a cap. So in England, we decided that not having a cap and having loans is better than having a cap and having it free. So now everyone has access to student loans. And because the student loans are guaranteed by the government, the universities don't really care about the quality of the education and whether it's paid back or not. They don't really care about the quality, and the government pay for it. They just set all their prices to the maximum. If you look on there's a government mandated maximum tuition fee, and you look at all the universities and all at the government maximum. Of course, they're going to be at the government maximum. Do you want to earn less money or more money? Of course. But if they were actually capitalists about that, they would stop backing the loans by the government. So the loans actually meant stuff. So you had to go to a bank, and then you'd be refused the loan at the bank for a £50,000 loan for a 3-year course in needlework at some worthless degree that you're never going to get employment from. You'd get refused by the bank.
You could also have that. that you
So
would get
people
rejected
wouldn't
from
go
that. In
to
you just said that
university
people
to do a 3-year
like in,
course in needlework, which is never
but
going to get them a job.
you have
And
the
then the
exact same
education would
result.
get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper because
But you
supply
have
and
the
demand
exact same.
wouldn't be
No,
bidded
well,
up.
that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. So, like for example, the
It is
exact
true.
same.
It wouldn't be
The
bidded up by
exact
government
no.
money.
Listen to what I'm saying. Like the exact same thing can happen in socialism. Like so, for example, as you said, like the nationalization of education meant that only so many people were entitled to it, which means that you have to create a metric from who can enter and who cannot enter into the education system because it's free. So you have to go like, right, well, so most capable, who needs it the most? You know, like essentially, are you in dire need of reskilling? And essentially who needs and like who are we desperate for in the economy? Like who do we need in the economy the most? Like this is like in capitalism, like you could have like so for example, we have an incredible amount of people that go into law, right? Because they want paid the most. Like they get paid a lot in law, so they want high paid jobs. Law is incredibly oversaturated. Most of those people end up being you know, like Tesco workers and shit. Like now, and the only people who really get into law are the people who either network their way in or are like super capable at law, right? Like you know, like for even people from first from Oxford and Cambridge get turned away from law. So it's incredibly oversaturated. Now, I think your solution would be to say like, look, the banks would realize that there is an inherent risk tied to that they're probably not going to become lawyers, that they're not going to be able to pay the loans off. And so they wouldn't allow them. See, I don't think so. I think what would happen is the banks would realize that this person would probably be wasting their money. They'd be like, right, they're not going to become lawyers, but they're most likely going to become, you know, some form of worker and pay like, you know, X amount of money back. Also, we can probably, and then, you know, arguably they can sell the debt. So and the safety of that debt in relation to how much risk is involved, like increases the likelihood of them being able to sell it. So there's the market of being able to
Who
sell
would buy
the debt.
that debt? They're never going to pay it
Well,
back.
did the manager? Well,
And look,
the manager did it
inflation.
before.
If you think about, dude, if you think about lending money, you've got inflation to deal with. If inflation means that consumer prices are going up 3% a year, and they're going to pay this back in 50 years' time, that's a lot of bloody interest in the meantime that you've got to pay back. And if they're not paying back a significant amount of money, like we're talking like more than you pay a mortgage, right? Then no one's going to back this money. That's why the only people stupid enough to buy this debt are the government. That's why it's government backed.
Well, no, because like, look, if you had subprime mortgages for one, and you have like
and
so
they went to zero.
Yeah, but it was capitalist. It wasn't government.
They got bought out by the government. The government was the
They ended up
bag
getting.
holder.
Yeah, no. The government was the ultimate bag holder because the economy was the bag holder.
Because they were
it's like as if,
and they didn't let the banks fail. Iceland let the banks fail. There are plenty of people who've let the banks fail. In America, in the history of America, in the historic times, they let the banks fail. But now they're like, no, this socialist nonsense. We're going to destroy the economy and tax everyone by stealth through inflation. We're going to bail the banks out and print loads of money. That's socialism.
I don't even know how you can even say that this is socialist when fundamentally it's about the profiteering of like a certain class of individuals who are privately owned an enterprise. Like the way that you define socialism is so backwards.
It's dumb. So it's socialist. Like, most government intervention is dumb. I agree.
Literally define government intervention or anything that is dumb as socialist. That's why this debate's not working, because like what you define as socialist is so unbelievably pigeonholed. Like
no. What I'm defining as socialist is the redistribution.
What I give the example of,
it's the redistribution of wealth in society.
I'll let you give the example. I'll let you give the example of like the subprime mortgages, like not subprime mortgages, like basically the subprime mortgages that exist as student wages, right? So like student loans rather. So student loans, they get created. A scenario of you know, like essentially the same thing happens again. They take short-term economic value over long-term interests of the economy, and you know, banks are going to fail, right? Banks fail, and this whole like sector of the economy fails, crashes down, and you see that as a positive thing. All right, a whole market of the economy has collapsed, And now there's an incredible vacuum of power that may plunge our economy into a form of depression from which we are going to have to somehow come out of, right? Like the Great Depression when the banks did fail then. So,
dude, ironically, when you're mentioning the Great Depression, the thing which plunged everything into the Great Depression was socialist policy of fixing interest rates. That's what plunged everyone into the Great Depression in America in the 20s. That was a socialist policy.
well, from what I'm like, if I'm maybe I'm not as clued up on this, but I believe that from what I've read, the Great Depression was like the beginning of the Great Depression wasn't the catalyst of the Great Depression was the need to cover as fast as possible in terms of debt. And so because there wasn't anything backing up that money, like the cascade effect of all of the banks claiming back their loans as fast as possible led to like people being unable to pay, which meant like a stagnation of capital and like the destruction of like the GDP. But am I wrong there?
Yeah, well, there was bank runs, but what happened ultimately was the socialist policy was to print more money to essentially do the precursor of what is quantitative easing today, and inflate the money supply, which just crashed the economy. Because when you have artificially low interest rates and print more money like we're doing now, you just debase the currency, and you create problem. It's like a stimulant. When you lower interest rates, you stimulate the economy because it's cheaper to borrow money and you get less incentive for saving money. So it stimulates the economy. But if you do it too much, it will just spiral out of control and collapse and go into recession. In a natural free market without socialist retarded intervention, what happens is the interest rates will naturally rise. So it will incentivize people to save money more, spend money less, borrow money less, and then the economy recovers. And how everything balances out in the ebbs and flow of the economy. But when it's the socialist policy to rock up and say, no, we're going to keep interest rates artificially low to stimulate the growth, then stuff goes wrong. And that's what happened in the Great Depression. And that's what we're on the cusp of again now. It's many times worse, in fact, than the Great Depression was. What we're entering now with the amount of money printed, it's a tremendous amount of money that's been printed recently, especially in America, but also in Europe.
Like, well, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna lie. I think we're just gonna have to have like another conversation on this. Because like one, I think we disagree on almost to the point in which we disagree on the definition. So it's literally almost every single thing.
Yeah,
You just see state intervention as socialism, which is I just do not agree with at all.
But even if I don't think that state intervention is socialism, I can still say that almost every intervention which is classically deemed a socialist policy, for example, healthcare for all, minimum wage, taxation of the rich and redistribution to the poor, education for all of these things, I can just go through them down a list, intervention in the interest rates in the economy, bailing out banks, all of these policies which were seen to be social goods at the time, or socialist policies by the socialist parties. I can just go down the list and say how every single one of these creates negative effects and hurts the people who it's planning.
What you're really pointing out is that state intervention in like a Keynesian system leads to more inequality, which I do not disagree with. Right.
Well, then, in this sense, if you can agree that whatever that is, if that is a disease, right?
Because then you have national
socialism.
Because I don't think that's socialism, right? That absolutely not. That can't exist. That is capitalism. Actually, I would say Keynesian economics is capitalist. But the thing is that the socialism, for example, let's say the nationalization of healthcare in the United Kingdom, like the NHS, I would say that works on an entirely different model than the Keynesian model. It's a separation from the model of education free for everyone versus student loans. Do you know what I mean? Those are not the same things, man.
Well, the student loans was a response, a socialist policy for freedom of education for all, but a response within the context of functioning within a capitalist economy, right? So that's a socialist policy in the context of a capitalist economy, which is why we have things called social democracies.
Well, I don't think. Well, one, I don't think that it is a socialist. So, for example, take what a socialist might advocate for something like minimum wage. People usually think that is a socialist policy. A lot of people, but the concept of a wage is in and of itself seen as unethical and unjustified in socialism. So a minimum wage is really, it's more of a liberal concept, and this is where you get the concept of liberalism.
Well,
And
that's exactly that's why you're defining.
And like this is the weird thing. Like the way that you define in socialism, right? Like for example, like if you were to look at like the differences between like the liberals and like Labour, like classically, like those divides are usually like some of the, like even then that was very Keynesian. Even Labour was. I'm trying to think of like a genuine, like if you were to like look at something like maybe sorry, my dog has just managed to get like a treat and he's really happy. But the he just totally threw off my chain of thought. Like if you look at like I don't know, like let's just take some of the policies like in Labour versus like some of them in terms of the Attlee government of 1945 or something, right? So the establishment of the NHS, that's a socialist policy. The I don't know, trying to think of another one. The investment into the housing scheme in like,
Okay.
like
Well, hold on, dude. I've just found a list on the internet. Elements of socialism. When it comes to socialist examples, here are a few defining characteristics you notice in socialism. These include no competition. They encourage cooperation rather than competition within the government. Egalitarian society. They create a commitment to social equality for all people. Public ownership. There is a lack of private ownership and common control within the government system. Many times, socialist systems are government run. Cover basic needs. The government provides basic needs such as healthcare and education. State regulates price control. Since there isn't competition, these countries lack stock markets and the government controls prices. So that is socialism. And that's exactly what I've been saying this whole time. And it seems that you're...
Can you tell me what you're defining? So you're defining socialism as the markets don't exist.
No, this is... I've just Googled, what was the Google search? I Googled, what are socialist policies? And that was the first thing I found as a list which came up. And you scroll down examples of socialism, it comes up elements of socialism, and then it defines this list, which I've posted in the debate chat. And it just goes down a list of the elements of socialism. It's exactly what I've been describing this whole debate. And it's exactly what you haven't been describing this whole debate. So one of us have got the wrong definition of socialism, and I'm sure it's not me.
Let's just I just need a second just to recover from that. Right. So one of us has definitely got the wrong definition. And it's certainly not you, apparently, right? And that's because the definition you use is
the one that you can Google and find everywhere.
What are you talking about? No, it's not. Like, so for example, like your definition puts state intervention. Your definition said that America is socialist. If anyone, but like I don't know a single fucking
I didn't say America was
thinks...
socialist. I said America has always been capitalist, but it's tending towards socialist policies. Like right now, it's getting quite socialist. That's what I said. That with the policies, like the bailing out the banks, now just a few days ago, as I gave the example, like we're going to create all these jobs with infrastructure all in the USA, and it's going to be government funded. And with the Obamacare and all of these socialist policies, these are socialist policies. So yes, it's getting more socialist, but it originally was very the shining example of capitalism, which I said earlier. That's one of the main examples of capitalism in the world was the founding sort of America.
But then, like when we did get on a capitalism and private property, and I said that you can't own labor, and that labor is actually you in the world, so you own your labor and the fact that you own what you do, and then you said that it could be sold and labor markets could exist, and I said, well, then that would be fundamentally uncapitalist. You didn't answer that.
Well, I just
Like,
don't know. It just sounds bonkers. I don't know what you mean that you can't, like, in a free market in capitalism, if I want to trade an apple for 50 cents or something, that's a trade I can do. If I want to trade me picking an apple and giving you the apple and the product of that for $1, I can do that. If I want to work on the farm picking apples, I can trade you my labor for money. This is all free market capitalism. We have the labor market, we
you don't
have
trade
the
like,
commodity
like
market, we have
this
various
is the
different
point.
markets.
You can't trade like if you understand what labor is, you can't trade labor because labor is yourself. You are being rented. That's the whole point of what I'm saying. And if
You've
you're
just
being
got
rented, you are
just got
rental property. You're an
you've just got
object.
like some you've just got
I'm
like
using the
some
Lockean
continental
definition.
definition of labor.
I'm not using. Oh, don't try and say I'm using some. I'm using a British analytic definition. It's actually prior to analytic continental divide. So like it's the Lockean definition. It's Anglo-American tradition. So
Locke says that Locke
you're
doesn't
using it,
say
but
that
you
you
don't
can't.
understand it.
Locke doesn't say that you can't be employed. Like, I've never read that Locke said that you can't be employed.
Locke doesn't say that. I said that Locke doesn't take it to its logical conclusion.
So you're reading more into Locke than he actually reads himself.
No,
So
no,
that's why I'm saying that you've got some
no. I said that
Marxist,
I'm
some
taking the
Marxist definition
Lockean. I'm taking the Lockean definition, and I am agreeing with it. And I'm saying if you read it to its logical conclusion, employment doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but you're just adding stuff that Locke never said.
I'm not. I never added anything Locke didn't say.
Yeah, you did. You added that you
Where?
that you can't sell your labor and you can't be
I said
employed.
that labor is owned. Like what labor isn't ontologically separate from you.
Well, I don't even. I can be agnostic on that and still say that you can sell your labor.
You can't be agnostic on that, and no, you can't. Like that. Like one, that's not how the word agnostic works. And two, I hate when people. I could just be complete. What you mean is you could be neutral on that, or like I mean the word agnostic. I'm not to be pedantic, but that's not what it means. And then two,
I mean, I don't currently have a positive belief on that particular position, meaning that I'm agnostic to it because I don't hold a positive belief in that position. Either could be the case, and I haven't decided, or I haven't got evidence for one or the other.
We accept, right, let's say you didn't know whether it was true or not. You can't hold the position of I don't know, but I still know I'm right. That doesn't make sense.
That's not my position. I'm saying I don't.
Yes, it is
because
you're saying that. You're saying that, all right. You can't own. If I was to say the position, you can't own. You can't sell labor because you are selling yourself. You sell the product of your labor. That would be the position which would mandate, let's say, employment would be fundamentally uncapitalist by your definition. So how could you?
Dude, this is bonkers. I don't even know what you're talking about, right? Because whether you want to say you can't sell your labor, you can only sell the product of my labor.
If I'm working in at the start of this debate, you said I was well poisoning. You've said no. Wait a minute. You've said that I was well poisoning. You've said that I've committed various fallacies and all that. And throughout this discussion, you've described my position as bonkers. You've said that you've described it as mad. You've said that socialism. You even used the R word in relation to socialism. You've used loaded terminology this entire time. You've said that your position was right. And that you have the right definition and I have the wrong definition. This whole debate, you've been nothing but uncharitable, and then you turn around and say I'm the one fucking well poisoning.
Dude, we've both been well poisoning. You've said just constantly saying about how China is repulsive, blah blah blah, etc. And how capitalism.
Yeah, I would say that regardless. I would say that regardless of
and you interrupt me constantly as well. But I think it's just heated because you're fundamentally a socialist and I'm fundamentally a capitalist. We're both very wedded to our positions, and so it's going to get heated, and we're going to get sort of angry a bit discussing it. But at the end of the day, still mates and stuff. Like, don't take it personally. It's just like I'm getting heat at the subject material, and because I am like very, very pro-capitalism, very, very anti-socialism. So of course I'm going to get passionate about discussing this. But yeah, if you say that I've been well poisoning, well, I think we've both been well poisoning. It's not the greatest thing to do. So maybe I'll try not to do that as much. but I think we've both been well poisoning. I do think though, as I started off saying in this conversation, right at the start, there's definitions, and everyone's using different ones, especially when it comes to socialism, communism, and capitalism and these words. And all we've done in this conversation is sort of highlight that is actually the case, because yeah, the diversity of definitions here is preventing a fruitful conversation, and I think it has actually been a productive exercise, in even if we've only demonstrated that definitions need to be clearer before even having.
I can agree with that. I can certainly agree with that. And I think, like, look, in terms of like the way that this debate's probably going to have to go on in the future, like what I would have to do is go in order to, and I think what you would have to do as well. So either of us, depending on which side, was, triumphant in that debate, would have to essentially debate on whether the Austrian definitions of socialism and capitalism are most appropriate, and whether we should use another economic definition, like in neoclassical economics or something, or like in Marxist economics, and like have that debate, because otherwise, I think that we're not even having the same conversation.
I think we've discussed a lot of things directly. Like we've talked about minimum wage. We've talked about the loans, student loans, and we've talked about policies. But in terms of grouping these policies and grouping these ideas into definitions, capitalism and socialism, we've not been able to do that here. But we've definitely talked about policies, and I think maybe you might be coming round to some of the Austrian schools thought when it comes to the public sector, when it supports when it what's subvention in English? I've forgotten the word. Subsidies. So when it subsidizes stuff, like it gets more expensive, like education. When the government subsidizes education, it gets more expensive and the quality falls. When it's in the private sector, because there's competition, the quality gets better and the price falls. So stuff like this is just, you were even agreeing at one point with me on this.
I don't agree with that. I genuinely don't agree with that.
With me that the student loans had
I think I agreed that the student. I don't agree with student loans, like that, like for very different reasons.
But you at least agreed that the student loans were putting the price up.
I think student loans are increasing the price, but I think that the price would also increase under free market capitalism as well. I think that they don't drop as like they don't like one are bypassing conglomeration and monopolization, and then there's also the realization that scarcity, making the product more scarce and harder to access, increases the value. And so individuals will be willing to pay more. So those who can access it and pay more will pay more. So the product actually isn't like, driving itself to the highest quality with the lowest price. It's actually, it isn't even necessarily tied to quality. It can be tied to something like status, and so on. So like, I think that's like to be entirely honest with you, I think it's naive in terms of the capitalist kind, like not you're naive. Like I think the capitalist understanding of like that relationship to be naive, like quality of service versus cost due to competition. I think as well, like obviously when you go into conglomeration and monopolization, things get a lot more messy. Monopolization, essentially centralizes. It needs to be prevented through state intervention usually. Otherwise, it centralizes costs, and then to get or like centralizes production, and then the individual consumer tries to essentially, or even another competitor tries to access the market and faces massive market blocks. Like these are things that we haven't even spoken about yet. So and in terms of like why I would reject student loans. I see them as fundamentally unjustified, getting people into massive amounts of debt so that they can get exploited by a capitalist system, and never actually essentially be slaves paying back loans. So not only are they being exploited in work, in how much they're being paid in the first place, but they're now being paid. Now part of that money is now going to the government so that they can prop up private enterprise and fulfill what is a capitalist mandate, I would argue. So
but where does the money come from? Where does the money come from to pay for the education?
Well, I think the money comes from usually it's like, in the sense of it being a loan, it works on the principle of
if there was unlimited supply. If it was free, where would the money come from?
Well, I mean, all right. Well, we'll get on. So you're not talking about the loans. You're not talking about where does the money come from there?
No. If we get rid of loans and say, let's have some sort of like a socialist thing where it's all free. Like you don't like the loans, right? So I'm saying, okay, if you don't like the loans, I don't like the loans either. But if you don't like loans, we want to get rid of the loans and make it free. Whereas I want to get rid of the loans and make people pay for it. Or where's the money going to come from if we get rid of the loans?
I would probably say that tax the private sector, like the market sector.
Yeah. Okay. So you're going to reduce the profit and productivity of random private sectors in order to hijack the money. Like
not hijack. I mean, I would say that it's a necessary cost for the market to function. And I just say that the market's incapable of self-governance.
Right. So the problem there is, if you're gonna say, okay, well, companies now are going to have to pay an extra 5% tax because we're going to have free education, so everyone can go to university and study whatever they want whenever they want, and the corporations are going to pay for it. What you'll get is corporations will simply leave and they'll go abroad, and you'll drive the economy into the ground, and then you'll have a peasant society of unskilled farmers, and you'll destroy your economy within 10 years.
Well, I think that's kind of essentially I don't agree with that. So what I would say is
where does the money come from? It has to come from somewhere.
Well, we'll all agree that the money is the way the money is produced in our society would be the same regardless in terms of the central banking system.
Well, no,
it's not about the money. What you mean is the value.
No. Look, money. If money is just printed and put in a room and locked, and no one sees that money, it might as well not exist in society.
So you mean the value of the currency?
Money is spent into circulation when it's printed, but when it is spent into circulation, it doesn't create more services and goods and value in the economy. It reduces the value in the economy. When you spend money into circulation from the central banks, you're debasing the currency and making
because
stealing from people's savings accounts.
I agree. So the value, what we're talking about is the value of currency, not currency itself. Currency is a symbol in representation of the value that exists in the economy, and the value of the economy is in the trade. It is in the willingness to trade.
Yeah. Demonstrated preference is the value, not the currency itself. Yeah.
Well, I mean, demonstrated preference. I mean, essentially that is I'm fine, but a trade, right? It is in the act of trade that essentially the value of the currency is determined. It's in the currency acting as a stand-in to essentially facilitate the movement of goods from one service to another. So money's in reference to every product in the economy, essentially. So money is worth so many shoes, it's also worth so much beer and I don't know, houses and stuff like that.
No, because a glass of water has a value based upon how much I'm willing to pay for it. This is what marginal utility is. If you're in the desert and you have no water, and I come up to you with a glass of water and say, here is a glass of water, it's 500 quid, you're going to pay me 500 quid.
Yeah, that's why I said the trade. That's why I said the trade. It's
in
the
second glass
trade.
You're going to pay me 100 quid. The third glass, you're going to pay me 50 quid. The fourth glass, you might have drunk so much water, you're not going to pay me anything at all.
Yeah, I agree. It's in the trade. It is in the, yeah. And I don't disagree there, but I think that exists in both socialism and capitalism. So where's the money going to come from? Well, the trades are still wanting to be individuals still have interests and preferences. Individuals are still like barter and trade. Like that's not even something. That's something that pre-existed capitalism. So I don't think that's necessarily like a fair, like, where's the money going to come from? It's going to come from the trades. Where the trade's going to come from human interests and preferences.
Yeah, but if people don't produce stuff in society, then there's no stuff to have value for, right?
But people will produce stuff in society because people will want and need stuff.
Yeah, but if you just tax all of the corporations to make them get fed up and shop and go abroad, then there's no stuff.
Like, one, you're seeing it like, so for example, like if corporations, like if profit is the incentive, and the only prime driving incentive of the economy, then yeah, like they will simply just be able to like globalized corporations will shift, fair enough.
Yeah. Just because the country thinks that.
It went very loud for some reason. I need to turn that down. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just because the country thinks that it's a good idea to redistribute wealth, it doesn't mean that the corporations do. And there's plenty of countries in the world where profit is still viable, so they'll just simply move, and you just wreck your economy in the space of 10 years.
Whether it's like, so you can tax a market and not make it unprofitable, and obviously like what I would say is like, and it's who's like, so for example, it's how the profit is being judged in the first place. So steel workers in Middlesbrough wanted, like in the red car steel industry, I think wanted to buy their plant, their like steel plant, right? Now they wanted to do it because it's still profitable and all of their wages will be paid, like all of what they're earning will be paid. They'll be able to come out of it and go like, okay, this is worth it. Like, we sell steel now and we're doing okay. Now, the corporation that owned that plant, they didn't want to keep the plant because it wasn't making enough money for them. They wanted to instead sell it and then build a plant somewhere else. So depending upon the individual looking upon the trade, as you say, the value of the trade is determined. So like the tax of the market, like increasing tax in the market for, let's say, someone like Amazon, right? They might be like, right, well, we're just going to pull out of this market and go invest in another market because we won't get as heavily taxed there. But that doesn't mean that another business wouldn't take that place and that the market wouldn't exist anymore.
Yeah, sure, but you would have less stuff, right? Because it wasn't profitable for Amazon at that price level, so they withdrew. Someone else tried. They maybe were able to do it at that price level, but they didn't flourish as much, right? It's not incentivizing stuff to be produced in the economy, it's hampering stuff to be produced in the economy, right? So that's, it's better to grow the economy and then have more money in the economy in the free market rather than tax all the corporations to the point where they get fed up and leave.
Well, that's not true. I mean, even the World Bank has come out and said like that reducing
the World Bank were a bunch of Keynesians, but carry on.
But I was going to say that the World Bank's even came out and said that reducing inequality by 1% has a greater overall effect on poverty, rates of poverty than increasing growth by 1%.
Right, but the thing is, the countries with the most socialist policies have fared the worst, and the countries with the most capitalist policies have fared the best, generally speaking.
Well, like you said that Britain, the fifth largest economy in the world, like that's like fared the worst. Okay, no,
but in England, apart from all the Thatcher era was actually a pretty strong time for England. And if you watch the last Prime Minister's questions, like everyone's just like so thankful and so grateful, like saying you're the best ever. And you don't really get that these days with the especially not with like Labour politicians. But anyway, yeah, the UK, especially
but I mean, like Thatcher filled the pockets of a certain class of individuals who will give her a round of applause and a very expensive funeral.
No. It really
did not benefit the average person.
What do you mean for the average person? Like the
Labour
policies
economic
harm the average person.
So like let's say like increasing economic growth, did that reduce inequality? No, inequality has been on the increase massively. So
No, no,
like
no, no, no. This is not the case, right?
yes, it is the
And
case.
who
Equality's been going
cares about
for a long time.
who cares about absolute equality? Don't we care about everyone getting
But
enough
even
money
if
to be
okay,
happy?
let's take it as in that, what would you say, like enough to survive on? Yeah,
No,
like
enough to
so.
be happy.
No,
Enough
but
that you're not in
let's just
poverty.
take survive, right? Because if you look at let's say the people like to point out that capitalism is, getting people out of poverty faster than any other system. Yeah, that's an
Well, it's
absolute
true.
no, it's not, and I'll
It,
explain why.
it,
So
it is, and the
so
social justice warrior take on this has been numerous and like
okay,
faulty
so
consistently. But
okay, so
go ahead.
tell us why.
Let's
Like
hear it.
no, seriously, if you got an explanation as to why. So the majority of the inequality that's being reduced, for one, has come from China, which has used wealth redistribution schemes to reduce the inequality and the of poverty. But two, the metric that they use is, was it like $1.70 an hour, something like that, when the actual living standard for, like, was it what is it what's it like, life expectancy for average life expectancy and adequate nutrition is about $7 a day, right? And they use
Well,
like
it depends on
one
what
dollar
country,
fifty a
what
day.
economy.
Yeah, no, it's averaged. It's averaged. It's world, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
it's
but
like,
it's just inapplicable. This is why I hate macroeconomics, and it
this,
makes no
but this is,
sense.
well, no, but the point of the matter is, this is why capitalism is supposed to be elevating people out of poverty, right? Because the reality is that, like, it's not the majority of the individuals in society. 4.42 billion people still live under this line, from which they're not able to feed themselves and clothe themselves and maintain adequate levels of nutrition. Like that's the reality of that situation. Like if we look at like for example, the place where inequality is dropping the fastest, as in like people are actually able to survive like more and more, it's China, and they're using redistribution mechanisms to do that. If we look at like how long it would take for people to overcome, like to hit the point in which everyone could maintain like this adequate level of survival, like adequate daily income for survival, we're looking at about 200 years without recession. So capitalism's doing a really bad job. Like
It's
there
just
are an incredible amount of poor people in the world. That
it's just very wrong what you're saying, right? Because so many things wrong with that, right? So, is this skewed cherry picking perspective, ignoring like the bigger picture, right? So, firstly, a lot of the time, the stories that the left like to paint of capitalism's shortcomings is based upon countries which aren't capitalist and have gotten worse since they've had more interventionism. And secondly, if you look at the most socialist countries, so many of them have spiraled off into absolute poverty. Like look at Venezuela, and lots of people say, "Oh yeah, Venezuela," and try and point out that it's not valid somehow because we don't like that example. But there's so many countries that you
I
can
don't
look
think
at.
that's a bit harsh, man. I don't think it's that. Like a lot of people, like, so for example, I know not as much about Venezuela as many people like genuinely, like, to take the time to debate this sort of stuff. But like Venezuela is like quite complicated. Like so so for example, there was a lot of wealth that left Venezuela before like the economy was already in crisis when the socialists came in, for example, from what I'm aware. Then an incredible amount of wealth left as soon as the socialists came into power, and so like they're left in this kind of like dubious situation. I think like oversimplifying Venezuela into like Venezuela's socialist and that's why it's failed is like not understanding like the geographic like ramifications, like the overall like human geography that's going on, that like is like economically tied into whether this country is going to be successful. It's like, look at the USSR. Like I hate like communism in terms of like the like USSR style like system, but like it was incredibly like productive. It was exploitative and wrong, but it was productive, and it was like, it doesn't mean like, and it didn't, and the reason it failed, really, if we look at it, I mean, like the one, like the way that the establishment of market socialism was like too little too late, and then obviously that put themselves into a stupid arms race where their economy was totally mobilized for the production of weapons, and so then ended up bankrupting themselves. So like the reality of the situation is like the way the economy was governed led to like crisis. But like
which is why socialism's a bad idea.
Well, no, not necessarily.
Well, you just painted your own example.
No, I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't say that we should emulate the USSR.
Right. So don't be socialist.
No, that's absolutely just ridiculous. Like you can't just say like, all right, I don't want to emulate the USSR. Well, don't be socialist. Like if I said I don't want to emulate, like if I'm a capitalist, like if I don't want to be a capitalist and I don't want to emulate the United States, that doesn't mean I'm not a capitalist.
Well, no, emulating the United States in the early days would be actually a grand idea. But the reason why I said don't copy the example of Russia is not because I was talking about the specific strategy, the specific policy that they had to produce weapons and the Cold War and all of that sort of stuff. What I'm saying is the problem there is the centrally planned economy. Whenever you have an artificially allocated economy of you're artificially allocating resources at central government level, then that's a problem. Anytime you have that, you have a problem, because it's so much more efficient and fair to simply bid for resources in free market, free for all, than a government come along and artificially allocate these resources and take them away from the people who need them and give them to people who might not need them in the infinite wisdom of the socialist dictatorship. That's not good economics. That's bad economics.
Well, one, I think that saying it's free and fair is absolute nonsense. Like, so who owned the means of production at the point in which, you know, an individual is determined to be an employee or employer? The reality is that feudalism and the accumulation of wealth through like direct power was what led to the capitalist class in the first place, and where many people have maintained their wealth from. Like, don't get me wrong, there is social mobility, but there isn't a massive amount of social mobility.
No, there's a huge amount of social mobility. The main people with the most money in society right now didn't come, like, look at Elon Musk, for example. He didn't have any money. He was working like shifts. He was working like night and day shifts, sharing one computer in a dingy office, and he was living in his office. That isn't coming from wealth. And most of the entrepreneurs,
using one example. I don't know the history of Elon Musk. I'm pretty sure Elon fairly wealthy, like South African family.
Dude, most people who inherit wealth lose the wealth. It's very easy to lose money, and it's very hard to make money.
15%. I'm sure it's like 15% or something like that. It's not actually massive. It's like a lot of people, like, and it's kind of like social mobility is like some people go up, some people go down, like 15% each way. It's not like most people, like 70% of people who inherit wealth lose their wealth. Like, I don't think so at all. But the whole point is that inheritance is in and of itself like a head start at the point in which you don't actually own that property. Like, the only reason that you own it is because you've inherited it from someone else. Like, you've not done anything that gives you rights to that property. It's the same thing with them.
Which is why you generally don't have any skills at maintaining that.
But then you can hire people. You can hire people who do have skills. But the thing is that the thing is
that's something you can do, man. But the thing is that the facts are that
somebody just said that Elon Musk's father owned an emerald mine in apartheid South Africa. Do you know if that's true?
I have no idea if that's true. All I know is that he was working like night and day shifts, like working like 16-hour days and stuff, and sharing one computer and living in an office. It doesn't sound like he was inheriting a lot of wealth there.
It comes down to like how much he had to invest, though, isn't it? Like in startup capital and stuff. But like I don't know. I've never heard of Elon Musk being called like rags to riches, to be fair. Like, kind of like scenario. But like,
I don't know if he was actually wealthy or not. I just know that he was working his arse off, and that's what got him where he is today, and not that he just simply inherited some money. Right?
And somebody like Jeremy's like an economist. I think you should actually really talk to Jeremy. I'd love to facilitate that conversation because he's like an economist. And like, I'll just love to just here, because he's not a socialist. He's actually a capitalist. But he just said there, like, it's a 30% go from the top to under 50%, and only 8% go from the top to the bottom. But I don't know. Do you know how many go back? Do you know how many people go up, Jeremy? Like go down, from like up, because obviously it's with the squeeze on the top, it's actually getting like lower and lower and harder at the end, and like the higher and higher percentiles. So it's like kind of like, so that's about like the statistics on it. So
I don't even know why people are particularly interested with the wealth gap between richest and poorest in society. That doesn't really matter to me. What matters in society is that people have enough money to be happy, because money is just, why do people think that money, the more you have, the more happy you are? It's completely a fallacy. Money doesn't bring you happiness. You need a certain amount of money to be happy, and after a certain threshold, it doesn't really.
But it comes out, there's a few things. So like I think that the distribution of resources, like your ability to like enact power in the world. So like Elon Musk, for example, has a considerable amount of power from which he can act with. He can do what he wants with, like charity
work. And he's
work.
doing sick stuff, dude.
Right, like even if he is, I don't think he's justified in having that power. One, because I don't think
I would give him that power in a heartbeat. He's doing more for humanity.
Like, I know you love Elon Musk. I know, right? I get it, but I'm saying that I don't think that he deserves. I don't think that Bill Gates deserves that power. I don't think that any of the entrepreneurs.
Bill Gates has done a lot of.
I know that Bill Gates has done a lot of philanthropy. I'm saying that I think that's an unjustified amount of moral power in the first place, right? So like
why is it unjustified when they're doing sick shit?
Because it's about who, like, for one, it's about who is entitled to the wealth that they have, and I don't think that they're entitled to the wealth that they've accumulated. I think that it's been
that.
It's not about me deciding it. It's about ethics.
Who are you to say that that's unethical?
I'm part of the group of people who go, wow, this distributionary system is unethical, which is what socialism is about.
I'm part of the group of people who are capitalists and who think that is awesome.
Okay, so let's make an argument as to why. Like, so if I say that, I would argue that that a laborer is exploited when they are rented, and that they should be treated as an end in themselves and not paid a wage. They should be an owner, and that's how an economy should work. That is the ethics of it. It's political by nature, right? Now,
so you're in favor of making it illegal for people to have the freedom to trade it based on their time.
No, I'm in favor of making it illegal for people to claim ownership for something that is not theirs.
Well, that's theft. Call the police.
It is theft. Wages, I would 100% say that wages are theft. It just so happens that it's not defined as such in our laws.
Well, why don't you go to Tesco's and call the police because the people are there stocking shelves?
But it's almost as if we live in capitalism and not socialism. And like, if I did call it, it's like if in a socialist country, if you were getting paid wages, I would go and call the police, and then they would get arrested. That would be what would happen.
That would just be
which I think is why the definition makes far more sense.
Can you see how that would be a dystopia?
No, I can't see how that would be a dystopia, to be entirely honest.
You ring the police and arrest people because they're engaging in free trade. That is a dystopia.
Ring the police and arrest the people who are employers because they are preventing what is free trade. It's not free trade. No one's being treated freely in it. They're being rented. They're being controlled. They're slaves.
What do you mean? They're not slaves. They're saying, look, I want that £10 please, or that £20 please. And they say, well, what can you give me for this £20? And they can say, well, I can stock your shelves for an hour to get that £20. And the employer says, okay, let's do that then.
It's not that. It's not like, this is a fair arrangement. It's more like, I have you don't want to starve, or you don't want to face. Yeah, no, I mean, because unless you look like there is an incredible amount of like unemployment. And by the way, like our economy functions on a certain level of unemployment, which has to be catered for. So that's like yeah. So unless like what happens to, we'll get on to what happens to the unemployed in 2 seconds, but like the consideration of let's say like whether you're going to starve, be homeless, all of these things, you're thrown into the world like hungry and crying, that kind of thing, right? Now you're in the situation where the only way that you can enter into fulfill those basic needs is in a coercive relationship. It doesn't matter of whether the relationship's fair or not. It matters from which you will go down on your bended knees and you will do it regardless. I mean, have you heard the Coconut Island example? Right, like
Before
Island.
you tell me about the Coconut Island, I just want to say that I absolutely agree that you come into the labor market wanting a job, and then you are presented with coercion, but not because of capitalism, but because of socialist policies. For example, minimum wage. You are coerced. If you take this job, you're doing something illegal. We're going to lock you in a box, or we're going to shoot you because you want to take a job for what we've deemed the arbitrary minimum amount that you can accept this job for. So what is happening from socialist policies like minimum wage is you're outlawing people from going and working. And you're saying, like, what about unemployment? Well, if you got rid of minimum wage laws and stupid shit like this, which are supposed to help these people that they actually hurt, then there wouldn't be so much unemployment, because people could just go and do any job, and the labor market would open up, and the amount of jobs would open up, and it would be a fantastic thing for the labor market. But instead, we get all this social
you
safety
like
net,
monopolization, conglomerization, and unregulated markets as well.
Yeah, I don't think that there has to be a zero regulation to the point that people get hurt, because then that's going against life, liberty, and property rights. But yeah, enough regulation so that's respected. I'm not
so you're anti-monopoly. You're anti-monopoly. So you'd say like an individual couldn't accumulate more wealth than a certain degree from which they would impede the wealth of another.
No, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I'm anti-monopoly because I'm a capitalist, and capitalism is about not liking monopolies. But the way that I would deal with that, the way that I would deal with that wouldn't be to enact some socialist policy. The way that I would deal with that would be to make sure there was an equal playing field for competition to thrive, which there normally is when you just get out of the picture. Like the government gets out of the picture and stops putting their evil talons into everything and intervening.
Like the government are putting their evil talons. Like, so, like, for example, like when labor drops to the point in which, you know, the labor market's so overly saturated that the government can either do one or two things. They can either force corporations to pay the wages regardless, you know, minimum wage, or they can send the labor to another country, because that's what they used to do. Right, so
why have we got minimum wage if we're competitive?
No, I'm saying that, like, so you've got a competitive system, and the system which is competing is trying to lower how much they're paying wage laborers as much as possible. Right, that is the goal.
That's not how a free market works, dude. You're thinking of a lopsided free market. So you're thinking.
Why do you think that a free market would work to pay laborers more than rather than less? Like, why would...
Dude, you're only seeing one side of, like, so every transaction has a buyer and seller. You're just thinking of like one side of that transaction. Every transaction has two parties making the transaction, right? So in a market, in a labor market, we have people wanting more wages, and we have employers wanting more labor for less money. So there's the market of both people bidding and asking, right?
Yeah, but the issue, what we'll find, is that laborers will accept anything to the point in which they can fulfill their most basic needs when they're desperate, because that's what they are, and so have no ability to bargain, which is why they usually have to create trade unions in order to increase wages.
No, unions hurt the people who form the unions. So
that is, oh my god, I've never heard that. Like, I would not, like, I'm sorry, just massively triggered us there. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I just absolutely disagree. Like, not like wages are run into the ground by corporations unless there is a unionization from which is collective bargaining, which exists.
I disagree.
As the other side of the trade, because until that point, there isn't two sides of the trade. There is one side of the trade, and then another disjunct, ununified side of the trade. You have a unified corporate entity which employs 1,000 people, and employs 1,000 people for let's say like £5 an hour. Right now, they know that there are, let's say, 10,000 people in the market, and they recognize that many of these individuals will say no to this amount of money at first, but they know that eventually they're going to have to come around, because they're going to need to fulfill their basic needs. And so, and since the unemployment, since there's a rife amount of unemployment, and jobs are scarce, they know that eventually they're going to have to fulfill these, fill these roles in order to maintain their basic needs. Now,
Right.
until a unionized position, individuals break at different times and undermine each other's bargaining position. They undercut each other in the market. They compete each other into the ground. Whilst the
Yeah, okay.
corporation
So
does not.
what will happen there, and dude, is I'm watching from afar as an entrepreneur, and I can see that the price of labour in Newcastle is really cheap right now. I'm going to move my production facility to Newcastle, and then put a sign up on the street saying I will employ people for £10 an hour instead of £5 an hour, because that's actually half the price, and I'm employing people in Essex, for example. And then all the people leave the mean factory and come and work in my factory, and then the efficiency in production of that factory drops because all the workers are leaving and coming to my factory. My productivity goes up, their productivity goes down. But what happens is that factory decides, oh, well, actually, shit, I actually need to raise my wages to compete, because all my labour's gone. I need labour, and my labour's gone, so I need to compete. So then they'll raise their wages, and I can't raise my wages any more than that. So then actually they'll outcompete me. So this
And I
is how
think that
competition goes.
in a vacuum that would make sense in some respects.
Right. But then it doesn't
yes,
make sense because
no,
the socialist policies prevent me from simply coming to Newcastle and setting up my factory and stealing all the labour from the other factory, because there's so much government regulation that I can't be bothered to enter the space. It's too much risk to enter the space. So there's no employers in the space because it's too expensive. The cost of production is too high for entrepreneurs, so they don't come into the space. That's what creates.
So this is I think a little bit too basic. So look at it like this: like if we're take for example the two factories. Let's say they're brewers, right? So they're competing against each other in terms of labor force, yes, but they're also competing in terms of supply. So one brewer buys up the industry which gives which provides the alcohol to or the hops or the base the hops, the grain, and all that. They buy essentially the supplier, and so they give the partner company, or not that partner company, but the other branch of that company, that it gets sent to them at cost, whilst they charge an increased amount now to the competitor, right? In order to essentially put them out of business, and then the labor market then desaturates. They can increase the prices of their alcohol sales, but they can also then decrease the prices of that labor of that work.
Hold on a minute. You can't buy up all of the hops in the whole of the UK. And
no, I'm not saying that you can't. I'm not saying you can't.
That's not the way that economics works. You can't buy up all of the resources. You can only bid up the resources. You can't buy up all of the resources. You can't.
No, I agree. Well, I'm not saying that that you can monopolize actually.
Yeah, but
only I'm not
with
saying
government intervention and weird.
No, I don't. No, I don't think. I do not. I do not accept that. I'm not going full on ANCAP that it's only through government intervention that monopolies exist, because I just do not. I do not accept that at all.
Well, look, the problem is a lot of these monopolies and a lot of these interest groups have power through the government because they lobby the government into doing certain things. But if government didn't have that power in the first place, then there wouldn't be any way to lobby the government, right? So why would we need lobbyists? Why do we need private interest groups to lobby the government if the government doesn't have any power to do anything apart from arrest you if you do something?
Oh, no. Yeah, but the government, even in putting in anti-monopoly laws and empowers certain industries. So you get certain industries that have the desire for regulation in order to prevent being outcompeted by other forms of business.
I'm opposed to most of this anti-monopoly stuff, right? Because although I'm opposed to monopolies just in ideology, in terms of actually implementing anti-monopoly laws, they often have the opposite effect. They often have unintended effects, and this is why all of the loopholes and all of the shady stuff takes place, because you've created this framework which you're trying to fix like a leaky bucket, but there's new holes appearing all the time. It's going to be really difficult deal with this. So the key a lot of the time is, instead of having more government regulation and more government intervention, to have less, and to shrink the power of government, and to incentivize the private sector rather than having all of this state involvement. That's generally the way that it goes.
Let's take the private sector. Let's say let's say the private sector is incentivized, and let's say there is a business model which is working successfully. And obviously, now, are you against patents or not? Like
No, yeah, you can have you can have a patent, I guess, but
okay, so someone, let's say someone produces, let's say, something that they own intellectual property for, like a way of like the structure of a certain company produces a product in such a way that is patented by that corporation. It's cut costs in half, and so massively outcompetes the other businesses that would have otherwise, came against it.
It's sort of begging the question there, because patents are expensive, and the more you niche down, or the more you make it so people can't copy it, the more expensive it gets. So generally what happens with patents are, I can come up with a design patent and get that patented for not that much money, but then someone can come along and make an orange one instead of a yellow one, and it gets around the design patent. The only way that the design patent actually prevents anyone from copying it is if I do the exact same design, but I can just tweak the design and do it myself. If you want a more rigorous thing to say, no, I actually patent this entire concept, and it costs a huge, it's exponentially more expensive to do that. So it's actually, in many cases, cheaper to not have a patent. So you're begging the question there.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I'm just trying to give the example of, let's say, like a notion of intellectual property, which prevents, at least initially, competition, and then at the point, like, from which the business is successful, they invest more into the patenting to secure that position in the market. They also invest heavily into research and development, producing new products, and they're also having a massive PR ad campaign. They've essentially got deals with like local newspapers and international newspapers and all that shit. Like, and then they start branching out and actually own media outlets, or they start buying up like other like property in other areas, which ultimately like aids that brand identity and secures that position in the market.
Sounds like they're generating huge amounts of jobs and opportunities and adding to the economy and causing prosperity and growth
now,
in the local
communities.
Communities.
They've gotten to a position in which they are pretty much the only entity in that market. Like, there are a few other competitors, but they accumulate, let's say, like 70% of that market, right? Now, what is stopping them from essentially paying the, like, so for example, they control thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs, let's say, globally, and they know that individuals, if, let's say, like where their plants are, they know that the local economy in that area is dependent upon their employment, right? Nissan, for example, in Sunderland is dependent upon Sunderland is very dependent upon the employment of Nissan, right? Otherwise, there's thousands of more unemployed, and so the job market becomes even more saturated. So you've got an already saturated job market. They go to the places that are already saturated, like highly saturated, as you say. The desire to go to the place where the labor is the cheapest. So they go to a place that's got a highly saturated job market, employ a load of people, and obviously the wages go up. But they're going up in reference to the size of their industry, right? They own the majority of the jobs, and so if they decide to sack everyone, the price falls again. And so when they're hiring, and let's say the hiring in in waves, the like seasonally, they need, let's say, 500 jobs in the winter, for the Christmas time. When they're hiring, the job market becomes less saturated. But since like the individuals, let's say, do not want to work for, let's say, $4 an hour, right? They think, well, that's bullshit. I'm being exploited, like shit, right? But there's very few jobs in the area, and the market's already highly saturated. Like, say it's somewhere like China, where the population's like 1 billion. or India where the population's unbelievably high, or even like in places in the UK where local economies are terrible. There's nothing really in the area, and people are being paid low amounts because there's nothing really in the area. They're not really getting, they're in this kind of like depreciation cycle where people don't have money to bolster their local economy. Things leave the local economy, and like businesses don't function, and so people get poorer and poorer until business comes in and invests, and the money goes up because the local economy starts to boom again. But when the local economy starts to boom again, it's only in reference to how much they're able to get paid off in terms of wages. And since they're trying to compete it to the lowest possible degree, if you monopolize like that area, right, where that local economy is almost entirely dependent upon your employment, you are going to control how much, like at least to a certain degree, how much those wage laborers are going to get paid. Like they're not going to get paid like $10 an hour. They're not going to be able to bargain for that. They're not going to be able to bargain for how much they ought to be getting paid. They're going to get paid as low as possible. And you've got a much greater amount of power in that scenario because you're one unified entity. You control like 1,000 jobs out of the 5,000 jobs in the area. And there are 20,000 people trying to find jobs who are desperate to find jobs. And so you have a massive amount of economic power in that scenario, right? Now, what I'm saying in that scenario is without government intervention, the relationship or intervention from unions, the relationship can become so exploitative that the individual is placed into what is like slave-like conditions. Now, that's like, I think, even unbelievably clear in many places, even in the United States, in Great Britain, even especially in like the developing countries. And I think that we see that today in capitalism. People are working longer and longer for low wages, and they're not really coming out of poverty. Like poverty is on the rise. Childhood poverty is on the rise in many places. We're not really accumulating wealth. So I'm wondering how you're planning on stopping monopolization and the problems of monopolization without government intervention.
Okay, yeah, it's very easy. Actually, the reason why there are gluts and employment imbalances in certain areas is because of government intervention, because the price of doing business in a certain area is too high for people to start up companies, because governments are taxing, because there's so much bureaucracy and red tape and stuff, that hoops that you need to jump through, and you need to do a million regulations. It's because there's so much regulation and because there's so much taxation and costs of doing business in a particular area. Only the big players have enough money and power to come into those areas, and then that creates monopolies. If you remove the government intervention, you make it easier for companies to start up, new companies to start up, then you make areas flourish again and bring investment into areas, and like new investment, not just monopolistic stuff. You, like, for example, let's say, what's that shit area on the above Liverpool, Blackpool. So Blackpool.
Poor Blackpool. Poor Blackpool.
Blackpool. If you said, okay, if Boris Johnson said, okay, right, Blackpool, we're going to remove all taxation from Blackpool. Any business that starts up in Blackpool and bases its entire operation in Blackpool, you're not going to have to pay any tax at all. How many companies do you think are going to go to Blackpool, move all of their headquarters to Blackpool, and start cranking out the production, employing people like crazy? Blackpool will be the next London. Like, do you know what I mean? It's a bit of an exaggeration, but you know what I mean? It will bring wealth and prosperity to Blackpool quicker than you can say capitalism.
I think, well, one, I definitely disagree with that, because I think that what would actually happen is that when so for example, like if let's say you were to put an economic policy like the pay like no tax, it's like, okay, right, and then like so what we like so for example in this system it's very capitalist in the sense that, and you think it's socialist, but like we privatize profits and we public we state own tax fucking costs. So take, for example, like the railway in the UK, the public essentially fix the railway.
Railway is pretty terrible.
Yeah, railway gets owned by Richard Branson. He makes a hell of a lot of money. And so we pay twice price to use the train. We'll pay in tax and we'll pay in it's kind of like the United States healthcare system actually, but the but the I would say that's very capitalist. Now let's say we're going like ANCAP. Now let's say the railway, like, it would not function unless someone intervenes. Now maybe you could make the argument that I think there's just as much possibility of the railway not existing sometimes, and there would be a lot of political instability. But I think forward to really because we've been going for what was it, 3.5 hours now. I think if we were to really knuckle down on this debate, I would have to argue that socialism was economically superior to anarcho-capitalism. And I would have to argue, which I didn't expect to happen, because I really thought this debate was going to be about, so for example, Marxism as a disease, and then socialism as not vegan, which we didn't actually get on, but we should talk about that sometime. But
that'll just have to be the next discussion.
Yeah, I think 3 hours. Yeah. So in the meantime, from what I've seen, I'll just quickly round that up. I think that in terms of what will actually end up happening is that businesses do two things. They act in short-term interest rather than long-term interest a lot of the time, as seen in subprime mortgages, the collapse of the whole sector. The economy needs to reboot, and then it happens again, and it creates political instability because it's immediate profit, immediate gratification rather than economic stability. And there's no governance. There's no reason that they need to care. And also you get the kind of pyramid scheme-esque kind of structure where it values individuals' engagement in order to produce a lot of wealth that can then be extracted, and then it's a pump and dump kind of mechanism. I think that you do get economists that say people real economists go for the long game, and that might be the case. It might be the case that it is wiser, but I don't think that's necessarily how the game ends up playing out. And then I think when they do go for the long game, there's an increased level of chance of monopolization, which ends up with increased level, the highest levels of exploitation that can be done. So that's kind of how I see things. If let's say we give massive incentives to businesses, they grow massively. They either grow massively and monopolize, or are really successful, or they self-destruct because they're not willing to cover their costs. If they monopolize, typically what happens is they become stable structures of society, but then ultimately the worker ends up being exploited to a greater degree. And all the while, throughout this whole system, regardless of which one you take, I would say that the worker not owning the property, as in the product of their labor, was the first point of theft. And it's why this is ending up in this situation in the first place, because they're already extracting money from somewhere that is not theirs. So if they were forced to pay the worker a certain amount, the economy becomes far more stable, because we don't require redistribution to prevent the constant, I don't know if you know in Marxism, where it's they talk about how the consumer becomes so poor that they can't buy the product that is being produced. That happens a lot. And so the only way that you can genuinely maintain a level of worker well-being, I would say, would be to move them from workers and employees to owners. But we can talk about this next time, man, if you want. And then I'll look into the Austrian School of Economics, which I don't know very much about, self-admittedly. And we can debate on which would be better, anarcho-capitalism or socialism or something.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, I guess we've moved into closing statements then for this debate. We didn't really get on to I didn't really make much of a positive case for either of the propositions, because, as we agreed, we didn't get past the definitions. So I think we're going to postpone that for the next discussion. I think for this discussion, what we have pointed out are that there's different definitions, and I would put forth that my definition of socialism here has been more accurate. Socialist policies generally like education for all, redistribution of wealth from the rich, increasing the minimum wage, healthcare for all, government intervention in the economy, state-centered resource allocation in the economy. These types of things are typically socialist, and I've argued that this is the case, and I feel like I provided a list that backed up my perspective earlier on. And in terms of socialism being a disease or Marxism being a disease, I guess we've discussed more socialism. I pointed out how every single one of these socialist policies falls on its face and fails to help the people that it's supposed to help. Student loans hike up it bids up the price of education, and through lack of competition makes the quality fall. Corporation tax makes it unprofitable, so corporations go elsewhere, and it hurts the economy because jobs are lost and there's less money in the economy. On a local scale, minimum wage hurts the people that it's supposed to support because it makes it illegal for them to work, and they otherwise can't work because they don't have any skills to offer at that price point. Government intervention in terms of interest rate fixing, we discussed briefly, hurts the economy, as we've seen in Venezuela, as we've seen Great Depression in the United States, as we've seen many times around the world. A free market economy is almost always a superior solution to economic problems than more government intervention, arbitrarily deciding what is best for the economy, when each individual person is demonstrating their preference through their own action, human action, and the state can't know the state isn't omniscient, so there's no way for the state to correctly distribute these resources. And I think I've made good points on those socialist policies, which I mentioned, the reasons why we even got into the healthcare one as well, briefly as well. So yeah, generally I've been arguing for free markets and capitalism, and pointing out the goals of socialist policies, and arguing that those socialist policies are the spirit of what socialism actually indeed is. So to everyone who's still listening after 3 and however many hours, thanks for listening, and I hope people got something out of this debate. And for anyone who's curious what Austrian economics actually means, there's a lot of good books on the subject. The masterpiece was written by Ludwig von Mises, called Human Action, but it's quite a long read, so there's other introductory books which you might want to check out. But yeah, maybe next time we can debate the original propositions, and we can, before we start the debate, actually decide on definitions to go forwards into the debate with. So I guess unless you've got anything else to say, perspective, I'd say Stone can wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll just make my closing statement. So yeah, I think that, like, in terms of the definitions, I think that your definition of socialism, I do not agree with. I think that socialism and capitalism, I think that you pigeonhole capitalism into free market capitalism, and I think that you pigeonhole socialism as literally the state doing things, statism, right? And I don't think that, I would not agree with that definition of socialism and capitalism. And to the point in which you would argue that redistribution of wealth from the poor to the rich was socialism, from which I would argue happens a lot with essentially this almost neo-feudalist, esque system where we'll pay taxes, to prop up big business. That I wouldn't say that's socialist at all. But your definition seems to point out that, say that no, that's socialist. I disagree. When you said minimum wage, obviously, minimum wage is something advocated for by socialists, but really it's a liberalist policy. It's essentially the main. I mean, to some degree, it's liberalist in the sense that it allows for for a wage to exist. And I think the wages are the problem, and giving a minimum wage doesn't solve the problem. I would agree. It just maintains the livelihood of a certain group of individuals because of the exploitative nature of wages. wages are them in and of themselves exploitative. They try to divorce the individual from the value that they produce, meaning that they can't act as the independent party within a trade, and in that exploitation extract as much wealth from them as possible to enrich a certain class of individuals, which creates a level of political instability. And that political instability will not be solved in capitalism, and it will continue to progress and undermine the system. And Keynesian economics, as though it may try, will not prevent the growing inequality and exploitation that we will see. So yeah, I appreciate the conversation. I think that we certainly need to go. I need to go away, and I need to go and read some Austrian economics, and then we can have a debate on which economic theory is better. Whether we should take neoclassical, Marxian, or Austrian, and whether anarcho-capitalism or socialism is the better economic theory, and how we define better.
But Marxism is a separate thing that we didn't discuss so much today. If we were to discuss Marxism is a disease, I'd point out the self-contradictoriness of like the private ownership, and like, for example, if everyone owns everything and there's moneyless, classless, stateless societies,
right?
Then if I want to use my bathroom, well, it's not my bathroom because everyone owns everything, and so I don't have the right to privacy in my own bathroom. But then we can say, well, I do own my own bathroom for like 15 minutes or something. So then we invoke property rights, but just with a time element to it, and it just becomes ridiculous really quickly. So either you start abolishing property rights, or you accept property rights and you get back to capitalism. Like it's one of these slippery slope things with Marxism. Okay. But that's a separate thing. With socialism, the debate was mainly on socialism.
I got you. And then my question for PP is, well, we can do this question in many different ways. So the idea is we can do it with like scarcity of resources. We can do it with like pernicious, just moral egoism for certain groups of people. But the question is, just envision the best socialist society that you want, right? When conflict arises between workers, how is that resolved any differently than under whatever capitalism is, right? So like an example to flesh this out would be something like patent example. They talked about patents earlier, like how inventors are treated, or the person who initially comes up with the idea for the patent and design is treated in socialist utopia, whatever best socialist society you can get, right? So if I make an invention, for example, some type of like gadget or whatever, some MacGuffin, right? I make invention, I have the plans for it. The second that I hire 2 more people and give them their equal share, they're going to fire me and take the intellectual property away from me because they don't need me anymore. So it becomes unclear where like this type of intellectual labor, perhaps, how that person gets paid in socialist utopia. And you can run this in, scarcity of resources, right? One town needs iron to make their pickaxe or whatever. The other town over has iron, but they don't want to give it to them. How does socialist utopia deal with that? So, those types of things, I don't think are a unique problem to capitalism.
I think that some of them aren't a unique problem to capitalism. I think that so for example, I think that you're right in saying how, like, take the intellectual property example. I think there would have to be a level of compensation. So for example, the individual who establishes like the worker cooperative has to go like, look, I've done all of the labor for this intellectual property. It is mine, and therefore I will trade it to you, and you can, like the worker cooperative take kind of that.
If I may interrupt, but now we're talking about wages as compensation,
no.
Right? We're talking about, intellectual, personal, like private property. It's mine.
No,
right?
I never
so
said like private property existence. You can have private property in socialism. That's fine. I mean, like, so for example, like this is like the intellectual property being yours at the point in which you are willing to trade it into the cooperative for the cooperative to use. You can see that I deserve a certain amount of, essentially I deserve a certain amount of essentially a value for what I've produced there within a trade. So the cooperative owes me money. It's like if as if you had invested money into the cooperative, and somebody didn't, you invest in that money means that they are contracted, the cooperative is contracted to you, a private individual. Like that would be a-okay. The issue is that when it stops being a trade, so like in terms of wages, it's I employ you to produce products, and then I'll give you this amount of money for your time, separate from how many products you produce, or separate from like the difficulty of making the products, separate from the value of the products. Now, none of that would be possible in a fair trade between two equal individuals, because you don't pay for you're not paying for the individual's time, you're paying for the product itself. And in terms of the scarcity of like not scarcity of resources, rather the individuals who are like trying to resolve a conflict. I think that one of the biggest issues is within capitalism we have an individual. I think there's that like famous saying, isn't it? It's like I fear better to anger one man, what was it, 1,000 men, than anger one man with the power of 1,000, right? Like the reality is that because of the way a corporation is structured, they're able to essentially approach a body of individuals, the working like the class of individuals, as a resource, and extract as much profit from them. And so trades aren't essentially bartered for and bargained at the point in which the individual agrees to perform a certain task and sell the product of their labor. Instead, they agree to essentially sell themselves for a certain amount of time and produce a product. These things wouldn't exist in socialism. That doesn't mean that like conflict wouldn't exist and that government intervention wouldn't have to happen to resolve essentially trade disputes, which is what we'll have with like central justice systems, even in the private sector. Like this happens all the time. So like I think that there would still need to be like outside intervention in terms of like the justice system, like tribunals and stuff. It's just whether like how exploitative that system can be. I think that a socialist system would be less exploitative, and there would be less conglomeration of power within a certain class of individuals, which is what's making the trades fundamentally unfair in the first place.
Excellent answer. Thank you.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any like final questions for Perspective Philosophy or Footsoldier? You could just put in debate chat real quick. I'll give it like 30 seconds. Alright, I don't see anybody typing, so I think that's it. I just want to thank you guys both again. I really, really always appreciate you guys.